Thalia Cavos, underestimated by her ex-husband Everett Thornhill, orchestrates a clandestine takeover of his real estate empire after a bitter divorce. Armed with her overlooked expertise and family wealth, she acquires 7 of Everett's 15 properties, including the iconic Promenade Hotel, through strategic shell companies. As Everett's flagship Obsidian project faces financial ruin due to a rezoning setback, Thalia's plan accelerates with Dominic's 30% stake sale. Her bold reappearance at the Cascadia Bay Properties showcase shocks Everett, hinting at her growing influence. What drives her relentless pursuit, and will Everett uncover her scheme before she claims the Obsidian? If Thalia's journey of resilience and triumph captivated you, join our community. Subscribe to our channel for more inspiring stories of transformation. Your support fuels our storytelling. Hit that subscribe button and share to stay tuned for tomorrow's exclusive tale. Let's build this legacy together. The email notification glared at me from the laptop screen, its subject line stark and unyielding. Closing confirmed, Obsidian Unit 712. My coffee sat untouched, its warmth long gone, as a faint tremor ran through my hands. I hovered the cursor over the message, hesitating, as if opening it might unravel the delicate thread of reality I'd been weaving for years. When I finally clicked, the email was brief, just a few lines confirming the sale. But to me, it was a symphony of victory. This wasn't just a property, it was the final gem in Everett Thornhill's glittering empire, the one he'd once called our legacy. Now it was mine, and with it, every brick and beam that had once carried his name. 3 years ago, Everett had stared into my eyes, his voice laced with smug certainty, and told me I'd crumble without his money in 6 months. His words had been a calculated wound, meant to shrink me into submission. But as I leaned back in my chair, the weight of that email sinking into my bones, I felt a quiet, fierce joy. I'd turned his empire into my own, piece by piece, while he'd been too consumed by his own arrogance to see it coming. You never truly know someone until they think they've lost everything. Or, in my case, until they believe they've gained it all by casting you aside. I met Everett at a charity gala in Meridian Bay, the kind of event where wealth and ambition danced under golden lights. I was 28, an event coordinator for the Historical Society, my days filled with preserving the past while dreaming of shaping the future. Everett, at 35, was already a force in Cascadia Bay's real estate scene, his presence commanding every room he entered. His confidence was a magnetic pull, his vision for transforming the coastline with sleek, luxurious developments a siren's call. When he spoke, his words painted a world so vivid, so attainable, that I couldn't help but be drawn in, not just by his dreams, but by the way he made them feel like mine too. Our romance was a whirlwind, a blur of helicopter rides over sprawling seaside lots, champagne flutes clinking on the balconies of half-built towers, and his voice low and promising, whispering, "This will all be ours someday." I believed him, not because I was naive, but because I wanted to believe in us. 6 months later, we were married in a breathtaking ceremony at the Promenade, his first triumph. A boutique hotel perched on the cliffs of Cascadia Bay, its windows reflecting the endless ocean. I stood beside him in a gown that shimmered like moonlight, my heart swollen with hope, thinking this was the beginning of something eternal. The early years of our marriage mirrored his meteoric rise. Thornhill Properties grew from a single project to a portfolio spanning 3 coastal towns, each development more ambitious than the last. Our home in Westridge Heights became a stage for his success, a polished showcase where I hosted lavish dinner parties for investors, sealing multi-million-dollar deals over creme brulee and vintage wine. I played the role of the perfect wife, supportive, poised, and, in Everett's eyes, perpetually awed by his brilliance. It was a part he loved me in, and for a while I loved playing it. What Everett never cared to know was that I'd earned a master's degree in urban development before we met, or that I'd spent 2 years working for my father's international investment firm, navigating deals more complex than most of his. I understood the machinery of his business, its levers, its risks, its rewards, perhaps better than he did. But Everett preferred me as the admiring spouse, not a partner in strategy, so I dimmed my light to let it shine. I smiled at his victories, nodded at his plans, and kept my expertise tucked away, a secret I didn't even fully acknowledge to myself. The cracks in our marriage appeared around our 5th anniversary as Cascadia Bay's coastal boom fueled Everett's obsession with expansion. He worked longer hours, celebrated with louder parties, and came home less often, his presence in our life thinning like a fading echo. At first, I convinced myself it was temporary, a sacrifice for the empire we were building together. I'd lie awake in our sprawling bed, staring at the ceiling, telling myself his absence was the price of our shared dream. Then came the afternoon that shattered the illusion. I found the text messages on his phone, written and unfiltered, from Belle, his 23-year-old assistant. They weren't discussing blueprints or contracts. They were planning stolen moments in the penthouse suite of the Obsidian, the very building he'd once shown me with pride, calling it our future. The affair had been unfolding for months, right under my nose, in the heart of his so-called legacy. When I confronted him, my voice shaking with a mix of fury and heartbreak, Everett didn't flinch. He laughed, a cold, cutting sound that sliced through me. "Did you really think someone like me stays with one woman forever?" he said, his eyes glinting with disdain. "This lifestyle demands certain adjustments." The words landed like a physical blow, but it was his indifference that broke me. I asked for time to process, to gather the pieces of my shattered trust. But Everett, ever the strategist, saw my pain as an opportunity to streamline his life. 2 days later, after a visit to my mother's, I returned to our West Ridge Heights home to find the locks changed. Taped to the door was a manila envelope, its contents a divorce petition and a handwritten note in Everett's precise script. "I've spoken with my lawyers. You'll get the vacation house in Pine Harbor and a settlement. It's generous, considering you brought nothing to this marriage but decorating tips. Let's be honest, Thalia. You wouldn't survive 6 months in the real world without my money. You should thank me for Pine Harbor. It's more than you deserve." I sat in my car outside the house that had been my home for 6 years, the note trembling in my hands as I read it again and again. Each word was a dagger, not just for its cruelty, but for its absolute certainty that I was nothing without him. The dismissal, the contempt, it wasn't just a betrayal of our marriage. It was a denial of who I was. But as the tears burned my eyes, something else stirred inside me, something sharper than grief. A cold, unyielding resolve took root, not just to survive, but to prove him wrong in a way he'd never forget. Everett had always underestimated me. He saw me as a trophy, a decorative figure who spent her days shopping and planning parties, oblivious to the mechanics of his empire. He never noticed as I listened during every investor meeting, my mind cataloging every detail. He didn't see me poring over property prospectuses late at night or building quiet alliances with his business contacts while he was too busy chasing the next big deal. Most critically, he had no idea about my family's wealth or the trust fund I'd never touched, set aside by my father when I earned my master's degree. "For when you find the right investment," Dad had said, his eyes warm with pride. I'd been waiting for that moment, and Everett, in his arrogance, had just handed it to me. I drove straight to the Perch, a converted lighthouse on the northern edge of Cascadia Bay that my grandmother had left me. Everett had scoffed at it, calling it a charming but worthless relic when I suggested renovating it. I'd kept it anyway, retreating there to read or sketch designs whenever he was away. Now it would be my sanctuary and my war room. The lighthouse's weathered walls seemed to hum with purpose as I stepped inside, the ocean's roar outside echoing the storm in my chest. My first call was to Zora Winters, a university friend who'd become one of Meridian's sharpest real estate attorneys. Everett had dismissed her as too bookish for his world, but I'd nurtured our friendship, drawn to her fierce intellect and quiet loyalty. When she answered, her voice was cautious, tinged with concern. "Thalia, I've heard rumors about you and Everett. Are you okay?" I swallowed the lump in my throat and steadied my voice. "I need your help, Zora. But first I need your absolute discretion." There was a pause, then her reply came, firm and unwavering. "You've always had it. What do you need?" I took a deep breath, the plan crystallizing as I spoke. "I want to buy Everett's properties. All of them. Without him knowing it's me." Another pause, longer this time, as Zora processed the audacity of my request. Thalia, that's ambitious. Thornhill Properties is worth... I cut her off, my voice steady with conviction. I know exactly what it's worth, down to the last mortgage and lien, and I have the resources to do it. 6 hours later, Zora arrived at the perch, her arms laden with takeout containers and a legal pad already scrawled with notes. We sat at my grandmother's old oak table, the bay's waves crashing below us, as I laid out my strategy. Everett expands too quickly, I explained, my voice low but fierce. He leverages each new project against the last, stretching his capital thin. He's vulnerable, and he doesn't even know it. Zora's eyes gleamed with understanding as she began to sketch out the legal framework, her pen moving as fast as my thoughts. Together, we mapped out a plan to dismantle Everett's empire, not with fanfare, but with the quiet, relentless precision of someone who'd been underestimated for far too long. In the heart of Cascadia Bay, where ambition and betrayal intertwined like the vines on the old lighthouse I called home, I was quietly orchestrating a plan that would unravel the empire of my ex-husband, Everett Thornhill. Everett was a man who lived for the spotlight, his identity woven into the properties he owned, each one a testament to his relentless pursuit of wealth and status. His cash reserves were always stretched thin, every dollar funneled back into the next grand acquisition. He thrived on the thrill of expansion, blind to the vulnerabilities this created. I, on the other hand, had spent years in his shadow, observing, learning, and now plotting. My heart burned with a quiet fire, fueled by the sting of his dismissal and the smug certainty he held that I would falter without him. But I knew something he didn't, a secret that would tilt the scales in my favor. Zora, my sharp-witted confidant and ally, sat across from me in the lighthouse's cozy, wood-paneled study, her brow furrowed with skepticism. Her dark eyes, usually so steady, flickered with doubt as she leaned back in her chair, arms crossed. Even if we could pull this off, why would he sell? She asked, her voice low but laced with the weight of her concern. Those properties aren't just assets to him. They're his legacy, his pride. I felt a flicker of satisfaction, the first in days, as a slow smile curved my lips. The answer was my ace in the hole, a piece of knowledge Everett had no inkling of. The Meridian City Council is about to rezone the Harbor District, I said, watching her reaction. His next big development, the one he's poured millions into, is dead in the water. Environmental studies have flagged issues, serious ones. His plans won't get approved, and he's already too deep in to pivot. Zora's eyebrows shot up, her skepticism giving way to intrigue. She leaned forward, her fingers tapping the armrest as her mind began to churn. "How do you know this?" she pressed, her voice tinged with both curiosity and caution. I savored the moment, the weight of my preparations settling between us. "The council president's wife, Meridian, is in my book club," I explained, my tone calm but deliberate. "She's an environmental scientist who worked on the study. Everett never bothered with those tedious social gatherings, so he missed the whispers." Zora's lips twitched into a grin, her amusement mirroring my own quiet triumph. Meridian had been a font of insight, her passion for the environment spilling over into our discussions over wine and novels. Everett, in his arrogance, had dismissed those evenings as frivolous, never suspecting they'd be his undoing. Zora's mind was already racing ahead, her pragmatism kicking in. "He'll be desperate for cash soon," she mused, her pen scratching notes on a legal pad. "But convincing him to sell his entire portfolio, that's a tall order." I nodded, my resolve hardening. "We won't go for everything at once," and I said. "We start small, with the properties he grumbles about when he's had too much scotch, the ones that drag him down. We'll offer just enough above market value to make it impossible to refuse, especially when he's staring down a financial cliff." Zora's pen paused, her eyes gleaming with the spark of a plan taking shape. "We'll need separate LLCs for each deal," she said, her voice steady now. "Different attorneys for every transaction, and someone local who knows property management inside out." My mind immediately went to Indira, a brilliant property manager Everett had once fired for prioritizing tenant satisfaction over profit margins. I could still hear his condescending laugh as he'd waved her off, oblivious to her talent. I know just the person, I said, my voice steady with purpose. That night, after Zora left with the skeleton of our plan in hand, I stood on the lighthouse balcony, the cool sea breeze tangling my hair, as I gazed out at the glittering expanse of Cascadia Bay. Somewhere out there, Everett was likely toasting his newfound freedom, smug in his belief that I was broken, defeated, crumbling without him. The thought sent a surge of defiance through me, my heart pounding with the thrill of what was to come. He had no idea I was building something of my own, something that would eclipse his empire and leave him grasping at shadows. The first move was the Promenade, a boutique hotel that held both sentimental weight and strategic value. It was where Everett and I had exchanged vows years ago, a memory now tinged with bitterness but also a fitting starting point. The hotel had been struggling, its occupancy rates plummeting as newer, flashier competitors sprang up along the waterfront. Through a freshly minted LLC, New Horizon Investments, Zora presented an offer 12% above market value, a figure carefully calculated to be irresistible. Everett's company, Thornhill Properties, snapped it up within 48 hours, their haste betraying his desperation. I visited the property the day after the sale closed, introducing myself to the manager as a representative of the new ownership. Every fiber of my being screamed to reveal my true identity, to let them see the woman Everett had underestimated. But I held back. Patience was my weapon, and I wielded it with precision. I threw myself into transforming the Promenade, channeling my anger and resolve into every decision. The lobby, with its dated chandeliers and faded carpets, was gutted and reborn with sleek, modern fixtures and local art that told the story of Cascadia Bay. I forged partnerships with artists to showcase their work in the guest rooms, infusing the space with a soul Everett's cold efficiency had stripped away. A complete overhaul of the hotel's digital marketing strategy brought in a flood of new bookings. Within 3 months, occupancy rates had climbed by 22 points, and the success felt like a personal victory, a brick laid in the foundation of my new empire. More importantly, it provided the capital to fuel the next phase. As I'd predicted, Everett's Harbor District project collapsed under the weight of the council's rezoning decision. The Cascadia Bay Chronicle splashed the news across its front page, environmental groups cheering the outcome, while Everett's name took a public beating. The timing was exquisite. Through another LLC, we targeted the West Ridge Commercial Plaza, a mixed-use development that had been bleeding tenants for years. Everett's pride wouldn't let him admit it was a failure, but his pragmatism couldn't resist the cash we dangled. Another above-market offer framed as an opportunity for investment opportunists. The sale closed swiftly, and I watched from a distance as Indira stepped in, her expertise turning the plaza into a thriving hub within months. Her changes, tenant-friendly policies, community events, and strategic leases breathed life into a property Everett had left to languish. With each acquisition, I kept my distance, letting Zora and a rotating cast of attorneys handle negotiations. Indira's management ensured each property not only stabilized but flourished, their rising values a silent rebuke to Everett's neglect. 8 months in, I had acquired 7 of his 15 properties. Whispers began to circulate in the real estate world, speculating about Thornhill Properties' apparent retreat. Everett, ever the showman, maintained a bold front, claiming he was streamlining to focus on flagship projects. But I knew the truth. Through my carefully nurtured network, I learned he was scrambling, his financing for the Obsidian project's final phase falling apart. His personal life was unraveling too. His affair with Belle had ended in a storm of rumors, with whispers of a harassment lawsuit looming. The man who had once seemed untouchable was starting to crack. I, meanwhile, remained a ghost in the public eye. After our divorce, Everett had been so certain of my incompetence that he hadn't even demanded a full accounting of my assets. To him, I was just the quiet ex-wife, tucked away in the Pine Harbor vacation house, living off the settlement and perhaps a trickle of family money. In reality, the lighthouse had become my war room. The rustic living room now hummed with monitors tracking property performance, while the kitchen table groaned under blueprints and development plans. I worked 18-hour days, fueled by a heady mix of purpose and the anticipation of proving him wrong. Each success sharpened my focus, each property a step closer to my goal. Then came an unexpected twist. Dominic Reeves, Everett's longtime business partner, Reached out through Zora after a real estate conference in Meridian. He wants to meet, Zora said over our secure line, her voice cautious. Says he has information you might find useful. My heart skipped, suspicion flaring. Dominic was the quieter half of their partnership, the meticulous planner who tempered Everett's flamboyance. He'd always been courteous to me, even apologetic when Everett's arrogance stung. But could I trust him? Did he hint that he knows what we're doing? I asked, my mind racing through possibilities. No, Zora replied, but he's worried about Everett's recent decisions and curious about you. After weighing the risks, I agreed to meet him at a discreet café in Meridian, far from Cascadia Bay's prying eyes. As I walked in, my heart pounded with a mix of caution and curiosity, knowing this meeting could change everything, or unravel it all. Dressed in faded jeans, a simple white blouse, and just a touch of makeup, I walked into the diner with a quiet confidence that felt worlds away from the polished, designer-clad version of myself I'd once been as Mrs. Thornhill. That life, with its glittering facade and suffocating expectations, was long gone, replaced by something sharper, more deliberate. My heart beat steadily, but beneath the calm exterior, a flicker of anticipation stirred. This meeting wasn't just a conversation, it was a pivot point, a moment that could shift the trajectory of everything I'd been working toward. Dominic stood as I approached, his face a mix of relief and unease. Thalia, he said, his voice low but warm. Thank you for meeting me. His eyes lingered on me as if trying to reconcile the woman before him with the one he'd known years ago. I slid into the booth across from him, the vinyl creaking under my weight, and folded my hands on the table. I'm curious, Dominic, I said, keeping my tone even, almost playful. What could possibly be so urgent that you'd reach out after all this time? We were never exactly close. His expression faltered, a flush of shame creeping into his features. He looked down at his coffee, stirring it with a spoon he didn't need, the clink of metal against ceramic betraying his nerves. I know, he admitted. I should have reached out after everything. But you know how it is, business, relationships, they get tangled. I didn't want to overstep. His words carried the weight of regret, but I wasn't here to absolve him. Not yet. I've learned that lesson well, I replied, my voice cool, giving nothing away. I'd spent years navigating the complexities of loyalty and betrayal in the world of high-stakes real estate, and I wasn't about to let my guard down now. Dominic's gaze flickered up, searching my face for a crack in my composure, but I held steady, my expression a carefully crafted mask. He leaned forward, his voice dropping to a near whisper. Everett's in trouble, Thalia. He's making mistakes. Big ones. The Harbor District rejection was a blow he's not admitting to, and he's leveraged the Obsidian to the brink to keep his empire from crumbling. His words landed like a stone in still water, sending ripples through my thoughts. The Obsidian, Everett's crown jewel, was more than a building. It was his identity, his legacy. To hear it was teetering on the edge sparked a quiet thrill deep in my chest. I raised an eyebrow, letting a hint of skepticism show. And you're telling me this because, what, you're getting out? My tone was sharp, probing, daring him to reveal his hand. Dominic didn't flinch. Instead, he leaned closer, his eyes locking onto mine with an intensity that caught me off guard. I'm selling my 30% stake in Thornhill Properties, he said. I've already started talks with potential buyers. The words hung between us, heavy with implication. That 30% stake wasn't just a number. It was a key to the kingdom, partial ownership of every remaining Thornhill property, including the Obsidian itself. My mind raced, calculating the possibilities, but I kept my face impassive, betraying none of the excitement coursing through me. I appreciate the heads up, I said carefully, my voice measured. But why me? Why now? I leaned back slightly, studying him, searching for the catch. Dominic's gaze didn't waver. Because I know it's you, Thalia. My heart stuttered, but I forced myself to stay still, my expression unreadable. The acquisitions, New Horizon Investments, Cascade Opportunity Group, Meridian Harbor Developments, all those companies snapping up Thornhill Properties over the past 8 months. I did the research Everett was too arrogant to bother with. I traced the ownership structures as far as public records would allow. I can't prove it definitively, but I know your mind, your strategy. This has your fingerprints all over it. For a fleeting moment, I considered denying it. The urge to deflect, to hide behind the carefully constructed web of shell companies was strong, but something in Dominic's eyes, earnest, almost admiring, told me this wasn't a trap. He wasn't here to expose me. He was here to align with me. I tilted my head, letting a faint smile tug at my lips. And if it were me, I asked, my voice low, testing the waters, then I'd want to offer you first right of refusal on my stake, he said, sliding a sleek folder across the table, at a friend's price. The words hung in the air, and I felt a spark of something, anger maybe, or disbelief. Friends? We were never friends. Allies, perhaps, in the distant past, but never friends. I didn't reach for the folder. We're not friends, Dominic, I said, my tone flat but firm. He nodded, unfazed. No, we're not. But I always respected you, Thalia. And I never agreed with how Everett treated you. Not at the end, and not during your marriage. His voice softened, carrying a sincerity that caught me off guard. He tapped the folder lightly. This is my way of saying I should have spoken up sooner. Consider it an apology. I studied him for a long moment, weighing his words, his motives. The folder sat between us like a challenge, daring me to pick it up, to step fully into the game I'd been playing from the shadows. Why not sell to one of those mysterious companies you mentioned? I asked, my voice laced with curiosity. Dominic's lips curved into a wry smile. Because I want Everett to know, eventually. He told anyone who'd listen that you'd never survive without him, that you didn't have the first clue about business. He shook his head, a glint of defiance in his eyes. I think he deserves to find out just how wrong he was. The words struck a chord, stirring the embers of a fire I'd kept carefully banked for months. Everett's arrogance, his dismissal of me, had been the catalyst for everything I'd built since walking away from him. I reached for the folder, slipping it into my bag without opening it. I'll consider your offer, I said, standing to leave. As I turned, Dominic's voice stopped me. He's hosting a showcase event next month at the Obsidian, he said quietly. Final phase funding. It's his last chance to save his reputation. I nodded once, my mind already spinning with possibilities, and walked out of the diner. The weight of the folder in my bag felt like a promise, a key to unlocking the next phase of my plan. Dominic's stake could change everything. The timeline I'd meticulously crafted to dismantle Everett's empire had just accelerated, and the thrill of it sent a surge of adrenaline through me. That evening, I sat across from Zora in my apartment, the folder open between us. The terms were generous, below market value, with flexible financing that made the deal almost too good to be true. Zora's eyes gleamed as she scanned the documents. This changes our strategy, she said, her voice tinged with excitement. With Dominic's 30% plus the properties we've already acquired, you'd hold a majority interest in Thornhill Properties. You could force decisions at the corporate level. I shook my head, my fingers tracing the edge of the Obsidian's investment prospectus. That's not the goal, I said, my voice steady but resolute. I don't want to control Thornhill Properties. I want to erase it. I tapped the prospectus, the sleek black glass of the Obsidian staring back at me from the glossy cover. And I want to own this outright, not just a percentage. Zora leaned back, her expression a mix of admiration and caution. So we stick to the plan, separate acquisitions until you've claimed it all. But with this stake, we can move faster. And she paused, studying me. What's that look? You're planning something. I smiled, a slow, deliberate curve of my lips. It's time for me to step out of the shadows. I want to make a public reappearance. The Cascadia Bay Property Showcase was the coast's premier real estate event, a glittering weekend of networking and deal-making that drew developers, investors, and luxury buyers from across the region. This year, it would be hosted at the Obsidian, Everett's flagship, the heart of his dwindling empire. It was the perfect stage for my return. The morning of the showcase dawned with flawless weather, sunlight dancing off the bay, a gentle breeze carrying the tang of salt and opportunity. From the windows of my apartment, I watched the distant figures setting up the grand pavilion outside the Obsidian. The building itself loomed over the waterfront, its black glass facade gleaming with an almost predatory elegance. It was Everett's monument to himself, designed to command awe and respect, just as he did. But today it would serve a different purpose. Zora arrived at 9 sharp, a garment bag and portfolio case in hand. "Are you sure about this?" she asked, setting her things down. "Once you go public, Everett will be watching your every move. The element of surprise is gone." "Dominic already suspects," I said, finishing her thought. "Others might too. Better to control the narrative than hide from it." I nodded toward the garment bag. "Is that what I think it is?" Zora unzipped it with a flourish, revealing a dress that was nothing short of a masterpiece. Midnight blue with structural lines that echoed the jagged cliffs of the coastline. It was both art and armor. "Indira's friend delivered it this morning," Zora said. "Custom made to your specifications." I ran my fingers along the fabric, its texture smooth yet commanding. "Perfect," I murmured. "Nothing says I've moved on like couture." The transformation took 2 hours. My hair was swept into an elegant updo, accentuating the sharp angles of my cheekbones. My makeup was subtle but flawless, enhancing without overpowering. The diamond drop earrings, my grandmother's, their value unmistakable to anyone with a discerning eye, added a touch of timeless elegance. The dress fit like a second skin, its silhouette sophisticated, powerful, and unapologetically feminine. When I looked in the mirror, the woman staring back bore no resemblance to the broken wife who'd sat in her car 8 months ago, clutching divorce papers, her world in pieces. That woman was gone. In her place stood someone new, someone who built empires and broke them. "You look like you eat skyscrapers for breakfast," Zora said, her approval clear as she handed me the portfolio containing Dominic's stake agreement. "Today's reconnaissance only. Make an appearance, gauge reactions, plant seeds of doubt, and sign the preliminary agreement with Dominic." I nodded, my mind already mapping out the day. "And remind Everett," I added, my voice low, "that I'm not the woman he left behind." As I stepped into the showcase, the weight of every eye in the room settled on me. The air buzzed with whispers, curiosity, and calculation. I was no longer just Thalia, the ex-wife. I was a player, a force, and today I would make sure they all knew it. The journey to the Obsidian took a mere 20 minutes, but every second of it was a deliberate act of preparation. As the city's sleek skyline blurred past my window, I steadied my breathing, grounding myself in the quiet resolve that had been building for months. My mind replayed the countless moments when Everett had diminished me, his casual dismissals, the way his eyes would glaze over when I spoke of anything beyond aesthetics, as if I were a mere ornament in his meticulously curated world. Each memory was a brick in the fortress of purpose I was constructing. By the time the valet swung open my car door, I was cloaked in a calm so unshakable it felt almost tangible, a shield forged from every slight I'd endured. Stepping into the Obsidian's lobby was like entering a stage mid-performance. The space was a masterpiece of black marble and stark, dramatic lighting, its grandeur amplified by the hum of Cascadia Bay's real estate elite. The air buzzed with ambition, the clink of cocktail glasses, punctuating whispered deals and calculated pleasantries. My entrance didn't go unnoticed. Heads turned, subtle at first, then less so. Double takes rippled through the crowd, followed by hushed murmurs half hidden behind crystal flutes. I could feel the weight of their speculation, their curiosity tinged with unease. My presence here, so soon after the divorce, was clearly a surprise, and I savored the faint disquiet it stirred. Accepting a glass of champagne from a passing server, I moved through the room with the grace of someone who belonged. My smile warm but impenetrable, offering nothing to the prying eyes that followed me. The social terrain of high society divorces was treacherous, and I could sense the hesitation in the acquaintances I greeted. Allegiances were fragile, and curiosity often trumped caution. "Thalia, what an absolute delight," Vivian Lancaster purred as she approached, her air kisses as practiced as her smile. As the undisputed queen of Cascadia Bay's social scene, her words carried weight, and her eyes gleamed with the thrill of potential gossip. "We've missed you terribly at the Historical Society galas. Wherever have you been hiding?" Her tone was light, but the question was a probe testing the waters of my post-divorce narrative. I've been diving into some exciting new projects, Ramon, I replied, my voice smooth and unhurried, as if her curiosity were merely a passing breeze. But the showcase, I wouldn't dream of missing it. There's so much happening in the development world. Too many opportunities to ignore. Vivian's eyes narrowed ever so slightly, her mind clearly racing to reconcile my confident demeanor with the rumors of financial ruin that had no doubt swirled in my absence. I let a soft laugh escape my lips, light and unburdened. Life's full of surprises, isn't it, Vivian? By the way, how's the harbor preservation project coming along? I've been thinking about making a rather substantial contribution. The mention of money, especially money that could fuel her pet project, shifted Vivian's demeanor like a switch had been flipped. Her smile widened, her posture softening as she reassessed me, no longer a fallen socialite but a potential benefactor. "Oh, we must discuss that further," she said, her enthusiasm barely contained. "Perhaps lunch next week? My assistant will reach out to yours." I nodded graciously, already scanning the room over her shoulder, my attention drifting to the scale model of the Obsidian's final phase where Dominic stood. Our eyes met for a fleeting moment, his subtle nod confirming our clandestine arrangement. The game was in motion. For the next hour, I wove through the crowd with surgical precision, each conversation a carefully choreographed performance. I asked pointed questions about recent property acquisitions, my tone laced with just enough authority to signal I was still a player in this world. I offered insightful comments on zoning changes, drawing surprised glances from those who'd underestimated me. And with every interaction, I dropped delicate hints about my interest in meaningful investment opportunities, letting the ambiguity spark whispers of speculation. I revealed just enough to keep them guessing, never confirming anything outright. It was a masterclass in controlled ambiguity, and I relished the way the room's energy shifted around me, curiosity and intrigue trailing in my wake. As the event transitioned to the outdoor pavilion for the formal presentations, I chose my seat with care. Near the back, partially shielded by a decorative pillar, but with an unobstructed view of the stage. The program listed Everett as the keynote speaker, set to unveil the Obsidian's final phase, and the anticipation in the air was palpable. A sudden hush fell over the crowd, followed by a wave of murmurs as Everett arrived, flanked by his executive team. He looked different, thinner, his once effortless swagger now tinged with something forced. His custom suit fit impeccably, and his smile was as polished as ever, but I could see the strain in the way he carried himself, the faint cracks in his carefully crafted persona. A young woman trailed slightly behind him, not Belle, but a near replica, with long blonde hair and a dress that clung too tightly. Apparently, Everett's taste in companions was as predictable as his ambition. I remained perfectly still as he passed within 15 feet of my seat, his focus consumed by the hands extended for shaking, the fawning greetings from those eager to align themselves with his fading star. He didn't notice me, and that was exactly as I'd intended. The presentations began with the usual pomp, self-congratulatory statistics about Cascadia Bay's booming luxury market, rosy projections for property appreciation, and vague assurances that environmental concerns were being addressed with cutting-edge sustainability measures. I listened intently, noting the speaker's references to a mysterious buying spree that had reshaped the city's prime properties over the past year. Theories abounded, foreign investors, tech billionaires chasing tax breaks, but I kept my expression neutral, my thoughts locked away. When Everett finally took the stage, the room leaned forward, drawn in by his well-honed charisma. "Distinguished colleagues, valued investors, friends," he began, his voice rich with the resonance that had once captivated me. "Today marks the culmination of a vision 7 years in the making. The Obsidian isn't just a building, it's a bold statement about the future of coastal luxury." The screen behind him lit up with breathtaking renderings of the final phase, a towering addition to the Obsidian, complete with ultra-premium residences, a world-class spa, and a rooftop restaurant boasting 360-degree views. The design was stunning, with living walls and advanced water reclamation systems that screamed sustainability. It was impressive, even to someone who knew the desperation lurking beneath the polish. "We've already secured commitments for 60% of the units," Everett declared, his confidence almost convincing. though I caught the tightness around his eyes, the telltale sign of a man under pressure. But today, I'm offering a rare chance to join something truly transformative. He outlined the investment structure, private equity shares with projected returns that struck me as wildly optimistic, even for a luxury development. I jotted down notes, recognizing the subtle panic woven into his pitch. This wasn't just about completing the Obsidian, it was about keeping his company afloat. My team will be available in the model units to discuss specific opportunities, he concluded. Together, we'll create the crown jewel of the Pacific coastline. The applause was enthusiastic from the newcomers, more restrained from the industry veterans who knew the rhythm of these high-stakes pitches. I clapped politely, my gaze fixed on Everett as his eyes swept the audience with practiced gratitude. And then it happened. His gaze landed on me. For a fraction of a second, his polished facade shattered. Confidence gave way to shock, then hardened into a mix of anger and disbelief. I held his stare, my expression a mask of serene neutrality, then turned to murmur something inconsequential to the person beside me. When I glanced back, Everett had regained his composure, but his rhythm was off, the faint last tremor in his voice betraying the impact of my presence. The game had shifted, and I was no longer just a spectator. Everett's voice faltered mid-sentence, a rare crack in his polished demeanor as he wrapped up his speech. His shoulders stiffened, betraying the unease rippling beneath his tailored suit. He stepped off the stage with a mechanical precision, as though every movement was a calculated effort to mask the storm brewing inside him. Phase 1 of my plan for the day was complete, and the satisfaction of unsettling him coursed through me like a quiet electric current. I'd spent months preparing for this moment, each step deliberate, each choice a brick in the foundation of my new reality. The weight of my resolve felt lighter than I'd expected, almost exhilarating. As the crowd drifted toward the model unit tours, their chatter a low hum of excitement, I slipped away from the main event. My heels clicked softly against the polished marble floors of the Cascadia Bay Property Showcase, a venue that screamed wealth and ambition. I was headed to the Obsidian's business center, a sleek, glass-walled room overlooking the marina where Dominic and I had agreed to meet. The space was perfect, public enough to keep our rendezvous above suspicion, yet quiet during the event's peak hours. I arrived first, my reflection ghostly in the wall of windows that framed the sparkling water outside. The sight stirred a flicker of nostalgia, a fleeting memory of a life I'd once imagined here, one filled with shared dreams and promises. I pushed it aside. That version of me was gone. Dominic entered moments later, closing the door with a soft click. His presence was steady, grounding, but there was a glint of amusement in his eyes as he set his briefcase on the conference table. "That was quite the entrance you made out there," he said, his voice warm with admiration as he pulled a folder from his bag. Everett looked like he'd seen a ghost, or maybe something worse. His lips quirked into a half smile, and I could feel the weight of his respect, hard-earned and genuine. "Not a ghost," I replied, my tone sharp but playful. "Just someone he didn't expect to see standing so tall." I smoothed the front of my dress, a tailored crimson number that clung to my frame like a second skin, chosen not for vanity, but for impact. It was a statement, a declaration of power reclaimed. Dominic's laugh was low and rich, a sound that carried no judgment, only appreciation. "The dress was a bold move, Thalia. Well played." We settled at opposite ends of the conference table, a professional distance that felt like a silent agreement to keep this transaction clean. I opened my portfolio, my fingers steady despite the pulse of adrenaline thrumming through me. "I've reviewed your offer," I said, my voice calm but firm. "The terms are acceptable, with 2 adjustments." I slid a revised document across the table, its edges crisp against the polished wood. "First, I want an accelerated closing, 5 business days instead of 30. Second, I want the right of first refusal on any Thornhill properties that hit the market in the next 6 months. Dominic's brow arched as he scanned the document, his fingers pausing over the accelerated timeline. Surprise flickered across his face, but he didn't challenge me outright. "That's an aggressive schedule," he said, his tone probing, testing my resolve. I leaned forward slightly, meeting his gaze. It's necessary. The showcase is already drawing attention. I want our deal finalized before new players start circling. My voice was steady, but inside my mind churned with the stakes. This wasn't just about securing a deal. It was about outpacing Everett, about rewriting the narrative he thought he controlled. Dominic studied me for a long moment, his eyes searching for something. Weakness, perhaps, or doubt. He found neither. "You've changed, Thalia," he said finally, his voice softer now, almost introspective. "It's not just the way you look, though that's striking enough. There's something different about you, a new kind of fire." His words landed like a compliment, but they also carried a question, one I wasn't sure I wanted to answer. "Clarity," I said simply, letting the word hang in the air. It wasn't just a response. It was a truth I'd fought to uncover. For years, I had been tangled in Everett's world, my desires buried beneath his ambition, my voice drowned out by his confidence. But now I knew exactly what I wanted. Not just the properties, not just the power, but the freedom to define my own future. "I know what I want, Dominic, and I'm not stopping until I have it." He tilted his head, a faint smile tugging at his lips. "And when you get it, when you've taken everything Everett built, what then?" His question wasn't accusatory, it was curious, as if he genuinely wanted to understand the woman sitting across from him. I smiled, a slow, deliberate curve of my lips that didn't quite reach my eyes. "That's the beauty of it," I said, my voice low and steady. "I haven't decided yet." The ambiguity was my power, a blank canvas I could paint with whatever future I chose. Dominic laughed again, this time with a warmth that felt like an acknowledgement of my strength. He picked up a pen, signed the revised agreement, and slid it back to me. I added my signature with a flourish, and just like that, I owned 30% of what was left of Thornhill Properties. The weight of that moment settled over me, not heavy, but grounding, like a cornerstone laid in place. "He'll know something's up when the paperwork hits," Dominic said as we rose to leave, his tone shifting to caution. "The news of your withdrawal will spread through the industry by tomorrow afternoon." "Perfect timing," I replied, smoothing my dress as I stood. "I should get back to the event. Everett and I are long overdue for a conversation." Well, my voice was calm, but inside my heart raced with anticipation. This wasn't just about business anymore. It was personal, a reckoning I'd been building toward for months. Dominic's eyes widened slightly, a rare crack in his composed exterior. "You're confronting him today?" That wasn't part of the plan we discussed. There was a note of concern in his voice, but also a flicker of intrigue, as if he couldn't wait to see what I'd do next. "Plans evolve," I said, my tone light but unyielding. "Don't worry, I won't jeopardize our deal. But some opportunities are too perfect to let slip away." I gave him a small nod, then turned toward the door, my steps purposeful. The business center felt smaller as I left, as if the walls themselves were holding their breath. Back at the main event, I moved through the model units with deliberate care, each step a performance of confidence and control. The spaces were breathtaking. Open floor plans with floor-to-ceiling windows that framed the ocean like a living painting, kitchens gleaming with imported Italian marble, bathrooms that whispered luxury with their spa-like serenity. In another life, I might have lingered here, imagining a home with Everett, a life where his promises held weight. But that dream had crumbled long ago, and I wasn't here to mourn it. I was here to claim what was mine. I made my way to the penthouse model, where Everett was hosting a small group of potential investors. His voice carried through the great room, smooth and commanding, every word polished to perfection. He was the picture of success, a developer at the height of his game, even as his empire teetered on the edge of collapse. I positioned myself by the windows overlooking the bay, a champagne flute in hand, my posture relaxed but intentional. I knew the moment he saw me. His voice hitched, just for a fraction of a second, as he described the custom closet systems. His shoulders tightened, a subtle shift that only someone who'd spent years studying him would notice. Everett powered through the tour, answering questions with the ease of a man who'd done this 1,000 times. He avoided looking at me, his focus locked on the investors, but I could feel the tension radiating from him like a wire pulled taut. When the group finally dispersed, ushered toward the next activity by his assistant, we were alone. The penthouse felt vast and silent, the air heavy with unspoken history. Thalia, my name fell from his lips, a strange blend of statement and question, his voice carefully neutral. He stood across the room, his posture rigid, as if bracing for an attack he couldn't predict. This is unexpected. I turned from the window, letting the afternoon sun halo behind me, a calculated move to keep him off balance. Is it? I said, my voice light but edged with steel. I received an invitation just like everyone else. The Cascadia Bay Property Showcase is a public event, after all. I tilted my head slightly, watching his reaction. His jaw tightened, a flicker of frustration breaking through his composure. You know what I mean, he said, his tone sharper now. You've been absent from the social circuit, from everything. His eyes swept over me, taking in the dress, the confidence, searching for the woman he thought he knew, the ex-wife he'd dismissed as broken and defeated. I've been busy, I replied, taking a slow sip of champagne. The bubbles fizzed against my tongue, a sharp contrast to the calm I projected. Inside, my heart pounded, not with fear but with the thrill of this moment. I'd spent months rebuilding myself, piece by piece, and now I stood before him as someone new, someone he couldn't control. His eyes narrowed, his gaze probing, searching for cracks in my armor. Pine Harbor suits you then, he asked, his voice laced with a faint condescension, as if he expected me to be clinging to the scraps of our old life. The settlement was adequate? I smiled, letting the question hang in the air for a moment. I haven't been to Pine Harbor in months, I said, my tone casual but deliberate. Sold it in January. Made a lovely profit. Waterfront properties have appreciated significantly this year. I watched the words land, saw the surprise flicker across his face. He hadn't expected that. He hadn't expected me. Everett took a step closer, his voice dropping to a near whisper, though we were alone. What game are you playing, Thalia? Why are you here? His eyes searched mine, and for a moment, I saw a flicker of the man I'd once loved, the man who'd promised me the world before he tore it apart. Game, I echoed, feigning surprise. I'm simply attending an industry event. As someone with growing real estate interests, it seemed appropriate. The phrase growing real estate interests hit him like a dart, his expression shifting from disbelief to suspicion. I could see his mind racing, trying to piece together what he'd missed. What are you talking about? He demanded, his voice tighter now, the polished facade cracking. I set my empty champagne flute on a side table, the soft clink echoing in the quiet room. Interesting presentation earlier, I said, my tone conversational but pointed. Ambitious projections for the Obsidian's final phase. Though I noticed you didn't mention the financing challenges. 3 banks have declined your construction loan applications, haven't they? I watched his face pale, a subtle shift that confirmed I'd struck a nerve. And then there's the lawsuit bell quietly settled, or the fact that you've mortgaged your Westridge Heights residence to cover operating expenses. His eyes widened, shock giving way to anger. How do you know that? He demanded, his voice low and dangerous. I stepped toward him, my movements slow and deliberate, my voice steady as steel. I pay attention, Everett. I always did. You just never noticed. The words hung between us, heavy with the weight of years unspoken. I could see the fury building in him, his hands clenching at his sides, but I wasn't afraid, not anymore. Whatever you think you know, he began, but I cut him off, my voice soft but unyielding. I know everything, I said, letting the truth settle over him like a storm cloud, including the fact that Dominic. I paused, letting the silence stretch, savoring the moment. This was my reckoning, and I was just getting started. The moment I revealed that Dominic had sold his stake in Thornhill Properties that afternoon, Everett's carefully constructed facade crumbled. His shoulders slumped, the last vestiges of his polished confidence evaporating like morning mist. His hand shot out, grasping the back of a nearby chair to steady himself, as though the room had tilted beneath his feet. The news hit him like a physical blow, and I could see the disbelief swirling in his eyes, a storm of denial and dawning dread. That's not possible, he murmured, his voice barely above a whisper, as if speaking louder would make it true. He would have told me. The words carried a desperate hope, a plea for the world to realign with his expectations. I leaned back slightly, my tone as casual as if we were chatting about the unseasonably warm weather. Actually, the paperwork was finalized about 20 minutes ago, I said, letting the words linger in the air. Dominic seemed quite eager to offload his shares before today's announcements. I watched as the implications sank in, each one a stone dropped into the still waters of his composure. Everett's face, usually a mask of calculated charm, betrayed him now. Raw, unguarded emotion flickered across it, a mix of shock and betrayal. He'd built his empire on control, on knowing every move before it was made, and here I was, unraveling that illusion with a smile. To whom? He demanded, his voice cracking slightly. Who bought his stake? The question was laced with urgency, as though the answer might somehow restore his grip on reality. I let my smile widen, this time allowing it to reach my eyes, a deliberate contrast to the cold precision of my words. That's not public information yet, I replied, savoring the way his jaw tightened. Then, shifting gears with the lightest touch of condescension, I added, Pine Harbor suits you, though. I assume the settlement was adequate? The question was a barb, and it landed perfectly. Everett's eyes narrowed, searching mine for some hint of the game he thought I was playing. I haven't been to Pine Harbor in months, I continued before he could respond, my voice smooth and unhurried. Sold it in January, actually. Made a lovely profit. Waterfront properties have appreciated significantly this year, haven't they? The revelation caught him off guard, his brows knitting together as he processed the fact that I'd been making moves he hadn't even suspected. His world, once so firmly under his thumb, was slipping through his fingers, and I could see the panic beginning to take root. He took a step closer, his voice dropping to a near whisper despite the empty room around us. What game are you playing, Thalia? Why show up here today? The words were heavy with suspicion, but beneath them lay something else. Fear, perhaps, or the first stirrings of respect he'd never bothered to offer me before. I tilted my head, feigning surprise. Game? I'm simply attending an industry event, Everett. As someone with growing real estate interest, it seemed appropriate. I let the phrase growing real estate interests hang between us, a challenge wrapped in velvet. His expression flickered, caught between disbelief and a creeping unease that I might know more than he'd ever imagined. What are you talking about? He asked, his voice sharper now, as though he could cut through the ambiguity with sheer force of will. I set my empty champagne flute on a nearby side table, the soft clink punctuating the silence. Interesting presentation earlier, I said, shifting the conversation with deliberate ease. Ambitious projections for the Obsidian project. Final phase, though, I noticed you didn't mention the financing challenges. 3 banks have declined your construction loan applications, haven't they? His face paled, the color draining as if I'd siphoned it away. How did you know that? He asked, the words tumbling out before he could stop them. I stepped closer, my voice steady and calm, a stark contrast to the storm raging within him. The same way I know the lawsuit Bell quietly settled, I said, or the fact that you've mortgaged your Westridge Heights residence to cover operating expenses. I paused, letting each revelation land like a hammer. I pay attention, Everett. I always did. You just never noticed. Anger flared in his eyes, replacing the shock as his hands curled into fists at his sides. He opened his mouth to retort, but I cut him off, my voice soft but unyielding. Whatever you think you know, I know everything. I circled back to the bombshell that had started it all, including the fact that Dominic sold his stake in Thornhill Properties this afternoon. Everett's grip on the chair tightened, his knuckles whitening as the truth settled over him like a shroud. That's not possible, he repeated, but the conviction was gone, replaced by a hollow dread. He would have told me. Actually, the paperwork was signed about 20 minutes ago, I said again, my tone unchanged, as if I were merely confirming a dinner reservation. Though I imagine you'll find out soon enough. His eyes locked onto mine, and I could see the gears turning, the slow, agonizing realization dawning. You? He whispered, the word barely audible. No, that's impossible. You don't have that kind of money, that kind of knowledge. I sighed, almost sympathetically, though the gesture was more for effect than feeling. "Oh, Everett," I said, my voice tinged with a quiet pity. "You never did bother to learn anything real about me, did you? Not my family background, not my education, not my capabilities." I moved toward the door, pausing beside him just long enough to drive the final nail home. "Remember what you wrote in that charming note you left with the divorce papers? That I wouldn't survive 6 months in the world without your money." His breathing had grown shallow, his eyes fixed on me with a mix of horror and comprehension. "It's been 8 months," I said softly, my voice a blade wrapped in silk. "And I'm doing just fine." Before he could muster a response, I walked out, leaving him alone in the model penthouse of a building that might soon slip from his grasp. The rest of the showcase passed in a surreal haze, my mind sharp and focused as I worked the room with purpose. I connected with key industry figures, expressed interest in specific properties, and laid the groundwork for the next phase of my plan, all while the memory of Everett's stunned expression fueled my resolve. He was noticeably absent from the closing reception, his assistant offering vague excuses about urgent business matters. I didn't care. His absence was a victory in itself. By the time I returned to my perch that evening, my phone was buzzing with notifications, voicemails and texts from curious acquaintances who'd caught wind of the day's subtle drama. Others from industry contacts suddenly eager to align themselves with me. Most telling were the 3 messages from Everett himself, his tone evolving from demanding to uncertain to something almost pleading. I ignored them all, instead dialing Zora to update her on the day's developments. "You moved too quickly," she said, her voice laced with admonishment after I recounted my confrontation with Everett. "We agreed to keep your involvement quiet until we'd secured more properties." I kicked off my heels, pouring a glass of wine as I settled into the plush sofa. "Plans change," I replied, my voice calm but firm. "Dominic selling his stake accelerated our timeline. Better to control the narrative than react to it." Zora sighed, the sound accompanied by the faint rustle of papers over the line. "Well, it's done now," she said, "and I just received confirmation that the transfer of Dominic's shares will be completed by Wednesday. Once that's official, you'll effectively control 3/5 of Thornhill Properties' assets." "Not enough," I said, my tone resolute. "I want it all, especially the Obsidian." "That may be more complicated now," Zora cautioned. "Everett will be on high alert, possibly looking to block any further acquisitions if he suspects you're behind them." I smiled, though she couldn't see it. "That's why we're going to approach him directly," I said. "No more shell companies, no more proxies. Tomorrow morning, I want you to send a formal offer from me personally for the remaining Thornhill properties." The line went silent for a moment, the weight of my words settling between us. "Are you sure about this?" Zora asked, her voice careful. "Once we show our full hand—" "He already knows," I interrupted. "He just doesn't want to believe it. The official offer will force him to confront reality." I took a sip of wine, savoring its rich, complex flavor as much as the moment itself. Besides, humiliation has always been Everett's greatest fear. The prospect of everyone knowing his ex-wife is systematically acquiring his life's work. He might agree to sell just to control how the story unfolds. Zora's laugh carried a reluctant admiration. "Remind me never to cross you," she said, her tone shifting to businesslike. "What offer should I prepare?" 10% below market value for the portfolio," I said, my voice steady, "excluding the Obsidian." I leaned back, the city's skyline glittering beyond the window, a silent witness to my assent. Everett had underestimated me for the last time, and now, step by calculated step, I was claiming what he'd never believed I could. I stood by the window, gazing out at the shimmering lights dancing across Cascadia Bay, the dark waters reflecting a city alive with ambition. My conversation with Zora echoed in my mind, her voice sharp and pragmatic over the phone. "Offer him exactly what he's invested in the Obsidian project," I had instructed, my tone resolute. "Not a cent more. He needs to understand this in a negotiation. It's a lifeline." Zora had warned me he'd push back, his pride too bloated to accept defeat without a fight. "Let him try," I'd replied, a quiet confidence had settling in my chest. Every day he delays, his position crumbles. After today's showcase, investors will be dialing Dominic's number, not Everett's. The tide's already turning. Hanging up, I stepped onto the balcony of the lighthouse my grandmother had left me, a weathered relic Everett had once dismissed as a sentimental, commercially useless heap. The cool night air brushed against my skin, and for a rare moment, I let myself drift into memory. I could still feel the warmth of Everett's arm around my waist that first afternoon he brought me to this very bay. His eyes had sparkled with a vision so vivid it felt contagious, his voice low and fervent as he painted a future of transformed waterfronts and towering legacies. "This whole bay could be ours," he'd said, pressing a kiss to my temple, his words a promise. "We'll build something extraordinary together." I had believed him then, intoxicated by his passion, blind to the arrogance that underpinned it. How bitterly ironic that his prophecy was unfolding, but not as he'd imagined, not with us as partners, but with me as the architect of his undoing. My phone buzzed, snapping me back to the present. Everett's name flashed on the screen, and I answered, my voice steady. "Thalia," he said, the single word heavy with a storm of emotions. Anger, desperation, perhaps a flicker of fear. "It's late, Everett," I replied, calm but unyielding. "What do you want?" "We need to talk," he said, his tone fraying at the edges. "Whatever you think you're doing, it's not what I think I'm doing," I cut in, sharp but controlled. "It's what I am doing, but yes, we should talk. My attorney will contact yours tomorrow with a formal offer. I suggest you review it carefully." His breathing came through the line, ragged and uneven, betraying the cracks in his usual composure. "This is absurd," he snapped. "You can't possibly have the resources to—" "You never asked about my family's holdings," I interrupted again, my voice cool and deliberate. "You never cared about my education, my knowledge, my capabilities. You assumed I was nothing more than a socialite with a knack for picking drapes and throwing parties. That was your first mistake, Everett." The silence that followed was thick, charged with the weight of his dawning realization. I could almost picture him, pacing in his sleek office, his mind racing to rewrite the narrative of our years together. "Why?" he finally asked, his voice softer now, tinged with genuine confusion. "If you had these resources, this capability all along, why waste years playing the supportive wife? Why not build your own empire?" The question was so quintessentially Everett, his worldview confined to power, control, and conquest, that I nearly laughed. Instead, I answered with raw honesty. "Because unlike you, I didn't need an empire to feel whole. I supported your vision because I loved you. I believed in us, until you made it painfully clear that love was a one-way street." Another silence stretched between us, longer this time, heavy with unspoken truths. "The note," he said at last, his voice quieter, almost fragile. "What I wrote about you not surviving without me. I was angry, Thalia. People say things they don't mean. People say exactly what they believe when they're angry," I corrected, my tone firm but not cruel. "You showed me who you really are, Everett. And that note, it was the spark I needed to show you who I really am." I could sense him grappling with my words, recalibrating his understanding of me, of our shared history. "So this is revenge," he concluded, a bitter edge to his voice. "Destroying everything I've built because I wounded your pride." "No," I said simply, letting the word hang in the air. "This is business. You undervalued an asset, me, and I saw an opportunity. Isn't that what you always preached? Find the undervalued asset and seize its potential before anyone else does?" His laugh was hollow, a sound of disbelief and grudging admiration. "Using my own principles against me. Brilliant. Review the offer, Everett," I said, steering us back to the matter at hand. "It's fair, given your position. More than fair, actually. If you refuse, we'll move forward with acquiring the remaining properties one by one, likely at terms far less favorable to you. The Obsidian's financing will collapse once investors learn Dominic's jumped ship. The banks will call your loans. You know how this ends." I could hear the businessman in him wrestling with the truth of my words, his silence a grudging acknowledgement of the checkmate I'd engineered. "I'll review the offer," he said finally, his voice tight, barely containing the storm of emotions beneath. "Wise decision," I replied. Good night, Everett. I ended the call and set my phone on the balcony ledge, the distant crash of waves against the rocks below a steady, primal rhythm. For the first time in months, I let myself feel the full weight of my emotions. The sharp sting of betrayal, the quiet ache of dismissal, and the fierce, intoxicating thrill of reclaiming my power. Tomorrow would bring new battles. Everett wouldn't surrender his properties without a fight, no matter what he'd implied. The Cascadia Bay business world would be alight with whispers about my sudden rise, former allies choosing sides, and old social circles shifting under the weight of my transformation from Everett's wife to his rival. But tonight, standing in the lighthouse, a property Everett had scoffed at as worthless, I savored the progress I'd made. In just 8 months, I'd acquired 7 of Thornhill's properties outright and secured a 30% stake in the rest of his portfolio. The empire he'd spent a decade building was now more than half mine, and I was only beginning. The next morning broke with a crisp clarity that mirrored my resolve. I dressed with intention. Tailored black trousers, a cream silk blouse, minimal jewelry. A quiet statement of a woman who meant business, not the flashy showcase persona I'd wielded yesterday. Today wasn't about spectacle, it was about precision, the next step in a carefully orchestrated plan. Zora arrived at 9, the formal offer in hand, a meticulous document outlining the acquisition of all remaining Thornhill properties, including the Obsidian. The terms were clear: a fair but firm price, full transfer of ownership, retention of key staff, and a non-competition clause barring Everett from developing in Cascadia Bay for 5 years. Zora raised an eyebrow as I reviewed the final draft. "It's bold," she said, her voice laced with cautious admiration. "He'll choke on that non-compete clause especially." "He'll complain about every word," I replied, signing the cover letter with a steady hand. "But he'll sign. The alternatives are far worse." As Zora prepared to deliver the offer, I felt a quiet surge of certainty. Everett's empire, built on ambition and disregard, was unraveling, and I was the one pulling the threads. The lighthouse, the bay, the future, they were mine to shape now, and I was ready for whatever came next. The sharp chime of my phone sliced through the morning's quiet, pulling my attention from the spreadsheets sprawled across my desk. A news alert flashed on the screen, and as I tapped it open, my pulse quickened. The headline hit like a gust of cold wind. Thornhill Properties faces restructuring amid major stakeholder exit. My breath caught, not from shock, but from the thrill of seeing the pieces I'd carefully positioned begin to align. The article detailed financial strain at Thornhill Properties, Dominic's abrupt sale of his ownership stake to an unnamed buyer, and whispers of a potential ownership shift for the premier coastal developer. It noted Everett's absence from key moments at the recent showcase event, a detail that carried the weight of unspoken questions. Most intriguing was the speculation about a series of mysterious acquisitions of Thornhill assets over the past year, tied to rumors of a new player consolidating power in the market. My name wasn't mentioned, but the groundwork for my move was unmistakable. A quiet surge of satisfaction coursed through me as I forwarded the article to Zora with a brief message. Timing works in our favor. Deliver the offer as planned. The waiting game began, but I wasn't one to sit idle. My morning was consumed with meticulous preparation, reviewing financial projections for the properties I'd already secured, each one a calculated step toward my goal. I conferenced with Indira, whose sharp mind for management transitions was invaluable, ensuring every detail for the eventual takeover of the Obsidian was airtight. The Obsidian itself was a gem, its location unparalleled, its design a bold vision that had outstripped Everett's financial reach. His missteps, overambitious expansion, underfunded reserves, had left it vulnerable, and I could already see it as the crown jewel of my growing portfolio. With disciplined management and realistic projections, it could redefine my presence in the industry. My thoughts churned with possibility, a mix of ambition and the quiet vindication of outmaneuvering a man who'd once underestimated me. At exactly 11:42 a.m., my phone rang. Everett's attorney, his voice clipped with the urgency, requested a meeting to discuss the offer. We settled on 3 p.m. at the offices of Harrow and Mitchell, a neutral ground that felt like a chessboard deliberately chosen for this high-stakes match. Neither Thornhill's gleaming downtown headquarters nor my own converted lighthouse, with its sweeping views and personal significance, would do for this moment. I arrived 15 minutes early, my heels clicking against the polished marble of the lobby as the receptionist led me to a conference room. Floor-to-ceiling windows frame Meridian's financial district below, a sprawling testament to the city where Everett had built his empire before his gaze turned to Cascadia Bay's coastline. The view was a subtle reminder of his past triumphs and his current vulnerabilities. Zora sat beside me, her notes meticulously arranged, her calm efficiency a counterpoint to the storm of anticipation brewing in my chest. She'd orchestrated the seating with precision, ensuring Everett would face the windows, the afternoon sun at my back. It was a small but deliberate advantage, a way to tilt the psychological balance in my favor. "He's bringing Lloyd Carson," Zora murmured, referencing Everett's longtime corporate attorney, "and Marcus Webb, the restructuring specialist." My eyebrows lifted slightly. "Webb's an interesting choice," I said, my mind racing. "He's a distressed assets expert. Everett's clearly weighing all his options, not just dismissing ours outright." But the knowledge sharpened my focus, a reminder that Everett, for all his current troubles, was no fool. At precisely 3:00, the door swung open. Everett entered first, his presence commanding despite the faint shadows beneath his eyes. His tailored suit and polished demeanor were a carefully constructed facade, but I could sense the tension beneath it, the weight of a man fighting to hold his ground. Behind him came Carson, familiar from years of navigating my marriage's legal entanglements, and Webb, whose reputation for salvaging sinking companies preceded him like a storm cloud. Everett's gaze met mine for a fleeting moment, a spark of recognition laced with something heavier, resentment perhaps, or grudging respect. He took his seat across the table, his posture rigid but controlled. "Thalia," he said, his voice a study in neutrality, "you're looking well." "Thank you," I replied, keeping my tone light but firm, my attention shifting to his companions. "Mr. Carson, good to see you again." "Mr. Webb, your reputation precedes you." Webb's eyes flickered with surprise at being singled out, but he nodded. "Mrs. Thornhill, Miss Cavos, I mean," he corrected smoothly after I gently interjected. "I've reverted to my family name." The moment felt like a quiet reclamation, a shedding of the past I'd carried too long. "Of course," Webb continued, "I understand you've put forward an acquisition proposal." Zora opened her portfolio with a practiced ease, her voice steady as she laid out the offer. "My client has presented a comprehensive proposal for the remaining Thornhill Properties assets, including the Obsidian development. The terms were delivered this morning." Carson cleared his throat, his discomfort palpable. "We've reviewed the proposal. While we appreciate the interest, the terms are not acceptable." I leaned forward slightly, my eyes locking onto Everett's rather than Carson's. "Which terms specifically?" I asked, my voice calm but unyielding. Carson opened his mouth to respond, but Everett raised a hand, silencing him. "The price for starters," he said, his tone steady but laced with strain, his shoulders taut. "You're undervaluing the portfolio by at least 20%. And the non-compete clause, it's excessive and unnecessary." I nodded, absorbing his words without conceding ground, my mind already parsing his objections. "The valuation reflects current market realities, not speculative potential," I countered, my voice measured. "As for the non-compete, it's standard for a buyer taking on a distressed portfolio with significant brand investment." The word distressed landed like a stone, and I saw Everett's jaw tighten, a flicker of wounded pride crossing his face before he masked it. "Thornhill Properties is not distressed," he said, his voice sharp but controlled. "We're in a strategic transition following Dominic's decision to pursue other opportunities." I tilted my head. I had my expression calm but unrelenting. "A transition accelerated by 3 rejected loan applications for the Obsidian's final phase," I said, letting the fact hang in the air, "and complicated by environmental issues at the harbor development site. Let's not pretend we're negotiating from equal footing, Everett." The bluntness was deliberate, cutting through the veneer of civility. Carson and Webb exchanged uneasy glances, clearly unsettled by the personal undercurrents rippling beneath the surface. Everett leaned forward, his hands folding on the table, his eyes narrowing. Why don't we address the elephant in the room, Thalia? This isn't just business for you. This is personal. His words were a challenge, daring me to admit what he already suspected. I met his gaze without flinching, a small smile curving my lips. On the contrary, I said smoothly, this is purely business. You created a vulnerable asset. Through overexpansion and inadequate reserves, I saw an opportunity and acted. That I know your business practices intimately is just an advantage any savvy investor would leverage. A muscle twitched in Everett's jaw, betraying the effort it took to maintain his composure. In the 7 properties you've already acquired through shell companies, he pressed, was that purely business too? My smile widened slightly, a calculated gesture. Strategic acquisitions through proper corporate entities are standard practice. I learned from the best, after all, you. The air grew thick with unspoken history, years of shared triumphs and betrayals distilled into this single moment. Webb cleared his throat, his discomfort evident as he tried to redirect the conversation. Perhaps we could focus on negotiation points. The price for the Obsidian, for instance. Non-negotiable, I cut in, my voice firm but composed. The offer reflects exactly what's been invested to date, allowing you to exit without loss. Given the financing challenges, that's more than fair. My words were a calculated strike, underscoring the reality of Everett's position while leaving no room for retreat. The room fell silent, the weight of the moment settling over us all, as I waited for his next move. Carson rifled through a stack of papers, his movements deliberate as he prepared to lay out their counterproposal. Our offer keeps Everett's ownership stake in the Obsidian intact, he began, his voice steady, but carrying an edge of defiance, while divesting the rest of the portfolio at a 15% premium over your proposed price. The words hung in the air, unexpected and heavy. Zora and I exchanged a fleeting glance, our surprise mirrored in each other's eyes. Everett was willing to let go of nearly everything, his sprawling collection of properties, painstakingly built over years. Yet he was digging in his heels over the Obsidian. That building, his crown jewel, was also his Achilles heel, a project teetering on the edge of financial ruin without an immediate influx of cash. Zora's brow furrowed, her voice cutting through the tension. That's not acceptable, she said firmly, her tone leaving no room for negotiation. Our client's offer is for the entire portfolio. Allowing you to cherry-pick assets undermines the whole point of this acquisition. Her words were sharp, a reminder of the stakes. Across the table, Everett's gaze locked onto mine, his dark eyes holding something I couldn't quite decipher. A mix of determination, desperation, and something deeper, almost personal. The Obsidian is non-negotiable for us as well, he said, his voice low but resolute. It's the cornerstone of Thornhill Properties' future. Without it, we lose our vision, our place in the market. I studied him, my mind racing to piece together his motives. The Obsidian was hemorrhaging money, its construction loans piling up interest faster than any projected revenue could cover. Yet here he was, fighting tooth and nail to keep it. This wasn't just a business decision. It was something more visceral. The Obsidian wasn't merely a building to Everett. It was the embodiment of his ambition, his proof to the world that he belonged among the elite of coastal real estate. It was his legacy, a towering symbol of his rise from scrappy developer to visionary. To let it go would be to admit defeat, not just to us, but to himself. Pride, ego, attachment, they all swirled beneath his composed exterior, and I could sense the weight of it in the way his jaw tightened, the way his fingers gripped the edge of the table. A cornerstone needs a foundation, I said, my voice calm but pointed. Without the capital to finish the final phase, the Obsidian isn't an asset. It's a liability. The interest payments on your current loans already outstrip your projected revenue for the next 18 months. My words hit their mark. Webb, Everett's associate, shifted uncomfortably in his seat, his unease confirming my calculations were spot on. Everett's expression hardened, a flicker of frustration crossing his face. You seem remarkably well-informed about our financial position, he said, his tone clipped, almost accusatory. I pay attention to details, I replied, meeting his gaze without flinching. Something you might have noticed about me if you hadn't been so preoccupied with crafting your own story. The jab was personal and it landed hard. Everett's jaw clenched, a visible crack in his carefully maintained facade. For a moment, I saw the man behind the developer, the one who had once dismissed me with such callous certainty, who had underestimated me at every turn. Before he could respond, Carson interjected, his voice smooth but firm. Perhaps a brief recess is in order. 15 minutes to regroup and consider our positions. Zora nodded. That seems reasonable. As the men filed out, Everett's rigid posture caught my eye, his back a wall of tension as he disappeared through the door. I stayed seated, my fingers tracing the edge of the table as I processed the exchange. Zora turned to me, her eyebrows raised. He's fighting harder for the Obsidian than I expected, she said, her voice tinged with curiosity. It's his biggest financial drain, yet he's clinging to it like it's his lifeline. It's not about the money, I said, my thoughts coalescing. It's about legacy. The Obsidian was supposed to be his masterpiece, the project that would elevate him from successful to legendary. It's not just a building, it's his identity, his proof that he's more than a developer chasing profits. Letting it go would mean admitting he failed, and Everett's ego won't allow that. Zora tilted her head, considering my words. So what's our next move? Do we accept the counteroffer for the other marked properties and tackle the Obsidian separately? I shook my head, my resolve firm. No, we stick to our position, all or nothing. But we need to figure out why he's willing to sacrifice everything else to keep the Obsidian. There's something we're not seeing, something driving him beyond pride or legacy. Zora stepped out to make a call, leaving me alone in the conference room. I moved to the floor-to-ceiling windows, gazing out at the city below. Meridian had transformed over the past decade, its skyline a testament to ambition and innovation. Gleaming towers pierced the clouds, each one a monument to the tech industry's northward migration from Silicon Valley. Everett had been part of that transformation, a key player in Meridian's rise. But when the market grew too competitive, he'd shifted his focus to Cascadia Bay. There, in an emerging market, he could carve out his own path, positioning himself as a pioneer rather than battling entrenched giants. The Obsidian was the culmination of that pivot, a project bolder, grander, and more visionary than anything he'd done before. It was meant to redefine Cascadia Bay's skyline, to establish Everett as a trailblazer in sustainable, luxurious coastal development. But why cling to it now when selling it could free up the capital to start anew elsewhere? The numbers didn't add up, and neither did his desperation. There was a piece of the puzzle missing, something personal, something he wasn't saying. The door creaked open behind me, and I turned, expecting Zora. Instead, Everett stood in the doorway, alone, his expression guarded but intense. "May I speak with you privately?" he asked, closing the door before I could respond. I gestured to the chair across from me, my curiosity piqued despite myself. "I assume your attorneys advised against this." "They did," he admitted, remaining standing, his hands clasped behind his back. "But this conversation needs to happen without the legal posturing." I studied him, noting the tension in his shoulders, the faint lines of strain around his eyes. This wasn't the Everett I'd known years ago, the confident, almost arrogant man who'd left me with a cruel note taped to our door, dismissing me as a burden. This was someone grappling with something deeper, something that had stripped away his usual swagger. "All right," I said, returning to my seat. "Speak." Everett paced for a moment, his movements restless, before turning to face me. "I need you to understand what the Obsidian means to me. It's not just another project. The structural innovations, the sustainability features, the way it integrates with the coastline, it's everything I've learned, everything I've dreamed of achieving in architecture and development. It's my life's work." "I'm aware of its significance to you," I said, keeping my tone neutral. "But that doesn't change the financial realities. The Obsidian is dragging you under." He shook his head, his voice earnest. "I'm not asking you to ignore the finances. I'm asking you to consider an alternative." He took a deep breath, as if steeling himself. "A partnership." The word caught me off guard, and I couldn't hide my surprise. "A partnership? After everything?" I asked, my voice laced with skepticism. A business partnership, he clarified quickly. You have resources I underestimated. I have the vision and the market reputation tied to the Obsidian. Together, we could finish it as I intended without compromising its design for short-term financial gains. I searched his face for any hint of manipulation, any sign that this was a ploy to regain control. You expect me to believe you'd partner with the woman you called a worthless burden? The one you said couldn't survive without you? The words were sharp, a deliberate reminder of his past cruelty. Everett flinched, his composure faltering. I was wrong, Thalia, he said, his voice raw. Spectacularly, monumentally wrong about you, about your strength, about who you are. I don't expect forgiveness, but I am asking you to look at the project itself, separate from our history. His apparent sincerity was disarming, and for a moment I found myself considering his proposal. The idea of completing the Obsidian as a partner, proving my worth through collaboration rather than conquest, held a certain appeal. It would be a chance to show the world, and Everett, that I was more than the woman he'd dismissed. But then the memory of that note taped to our door flooded back. The sting of his words, the humiliation of being cast aside, anchored me to reality. I couldn't let sentiment cloud my judgment, not when so much was at stake. The air in the room felt heavy with the weight of Everett's words, his casual cruelty slicing through me like a blade honed by years of arrogance. His absolute certainty that I was nothing without him lingered, a bitter echo that stirred a storm of emotions within me. Anger, defiance, and a quiet, resolute strength I'd fought hard to reclaim. No, I said, my voice steady despite the churn of feelings beneath the surface. I won't partner with you, Everett. Not now, not ever again. The finality of my words hung between us, a line drawn in the sand. His face tightened, a flicker of something, anger perhaps, or wounded pride, crossing his features. Because of pride, he asked, his tone sharp, almost accusatory. Or because you'd rather tear down everything I've built than see it thrive with me still in the picture? I met his gaze, unflinching, though my heart pounded with the weight of what I was about to say. Because trust, once shattered, doesn't piece itself back together through boardroom deals. I replied, my voice soft but unyielding. In your unguarded moments, you showed me exactly who you are. Someone who sees me as an accessory, not an equal. I believe that version of you, Everett, not the one standing here now, offering compromises because you're backed into a corner. My words landed like stones, each one carrying the weight of years spent under his shadow, dismissed and diminished. Everett stared at me, his eyes betraying a tangle of emotions, surprise, perhaps, or a fleeting glimpse of something deeper, something human. For a moment, I thought I saw regret, but it was gone as quickly as it appeared, replaced by the calculated mask he wore so well. He shifted gears, his voice taking on a quieter, more probing tone. Then at least tell me why the Obsidian, he said. With all your resources, you could have chased any development opportunity. Why fixate on dismantling what I've built? The question deserved an answer, not just for him, but for me, to close this chapter with the clarity it demanded. I took a breath, steadying myself against the flood of memories. Dinner parties where he'd boasted about the Obsidian, framing it as the crown jewel of his empire, a monument to his genius. Because you used it to define me, I said, my voice low but firm. Every time you spoke of the Obsidian, you made it the proof of your triumph, a trophy that supposedly justified treating me as ornamental, not essential. You turned it into a symbol of your superiority. I held his gaze, letting the truth settle between us. So, yes, I want it. Not to destroy it, but to reshape it into something greater than you ever imagined. Something that reflects who I am, not who you think I should be. The raw honesty of my words hung in the air, too potent for either of us to hide behind the usual armor of corporate jargon or legal maneuvering. Everett's expression shifted, cycling through emotions like a storm passing through, anger, a flicker of remorse, and finally a grudging respect that surprised me. You'll have Carson's formal response to your offer by tomorrow morning, he said, his voice clipped as he moved toward the door. But our stance on the Obsidian hasn't changed. He left and I stayed seated, the weight of the confrontation settling over me like a heavy fog. There was something I wasn't seeing, something beyond his ego or desire for legacy that tethered him so fiercely to the Obsidian. It wasn't just pride, it was something deeper, something that made him willing to let everything else crumble to keep control of that one property. I turned the thought over in my mind, searching for the missing piece. Zora stepped back into the room, her sharp eyes catching the tension still lingering in my posture. "Everything okay?" she asked, glancing toward the door Everett had just exited. I saw him leave. "He offered a partnership for the Obsidian," I said, still processing. I turned it down. Her eyebrows shot up, a mix of surprise and admiration in her expression. "That's bold of him. Desperate, even." "Exactly," I said, my fingers tapping thoughtfully against the table. "And that's what worries me. Everett doesn't do desperate without a reason." My mind churned, piecing together fragments of his behavior, his insistence on holding the Obsidian at all costs. "I need you to dig deeper into the Obsidian's paperwork," I told her. "Not just the financing and permits we've already gone through. Look for anything unusual. Zoning variances, environmental exceptions, development rights that might transfer with ownership. Anything that stands out." Zora's eyes narrowed, catching the thread of my suspicion. "You think he's hiding something?" "I think there's a reason he's fighting hardest for the property that's dragging him down financially," I said. "And I want to know what it is before we make our next move." The meeting wrapped up shortly after, with Carson delivering their formal rejection of our offer as expected. Their counterproposal was predictable. Everett would retain full ownership of the Obsidian while offloading his other properties at a premium. They called it their best and final position, a tired negotiating tactic that rarely held true. As we left the building, I caught sight of Everett in the lobby, standing by the towering windows, his back to us. His phone was pressed to his ear, his shoulders tense, his posture radiating frustration. Whatever conversation he was having wasn't going his way, and he was too absorbed to notice us slipping out. I filed the image away, another clue to the puzzle I was determined to solve. Back at our headquarters, I gathered my core team, Zora, Indira, and 2 financial analysts we'd brought on to handle our expanding portfolio. The dining table was a chaotic spread of Cascadia Bay's coastal maps, ownership records, and financial projections, each document a piece of the larger mystery. "There's something we're missing about the Obsidian," I said, pacing the room, my voice edged with urgency. "Everett is many things, but reckless with money isn't one of them. His obsession with keeping that property, even at the cost of everything else, doesn't add up." Indira, ever the pragmatist, leaned over the coastal map, her brow furrowed in thought. "What about the surrounding parcels?" she asked. "Could there be a planned development that would spike the Obsidian's value beyond what we're seeing?" One of the analysts shook his head. "We've checked the Planning Commission records. There's nothing unusual in the pipeline for that area." "What about beneath the surface?" Zora interjected, her voice sharp with sudden inspiration. "Mineral rights, underwater cables, geological surveys, something like that." Her words sparked a memory, faint but vivid. A dinner party years ago, Everett slightly drunk, his eyes alight as he spoke to an investor about future-proofing the Obsidian. I'd assumed he was talking about sustainable design, solar panels, eco-friendly materials. But what if it was more? "Check the geological surveys," I instructed, my pulse quickening, "and the original land acquisition documents. There could be something buried in the fine print that explains why he's so attached." As the team dove into the research, my phone buzzed with a news alert that sent my heart racing. The headline was stark: "Thornhill Properties facing potential takeover by ex-wife." The article laid it all bare: my name, my systematic acquisition of Everett's properties, and the ongoing battle over the Obsidian. It quoted unnamed sources close to the negotiations, painting Everett as a man on the edge, his financial empire teetering. My phone erupted with calls and messages. Old friends, business contacts, even journalists hungry for a comment. I ignored them, my mind zeroing in on the critical question: who had leaked this, and why now? "Everett's trying to control the narrative," Zora suggested when I showed her the article. "By making this public, he's framing it as a personal vendetta. A scorned ex-wife out for revenge. It could drum up sympathy from investors. Or he's trying to draw out competing bidders, I countered, my thoughts racing. Turning the Obsidian into a public auction could drive the price beyond what I've offered. The idea settled uneasily, another layer to the enigma of Everett's desperation. Whatever his game, I was determined to uncover the truth behind the Obsidian before he could outmaneuver me again. Indira stormed into the room, her eyes alight with a fierce determination that cut through the tense air like a blade. She clutched a thick file in her hands, her knuckles whitening as she held it aloft like a trophy. "I found it," she declared, her voice ringing with triumph, though there was a tremor of urgency beneath her confidence. She crossed the room in quick strides, her heels clicking sharply against the polished floor, and flung the file open on the table. Papers spilled across the surface, a cascade of documents marked with neon yellow highlights that glowed under the fluorescent lights. "It's bigger than we ever imagined," she said, her finger jabbing at a paragraph on the topmost page. The Obsidian site isn't just another luxury development. Everett secured special deep water access rights that weren't disclosed in the public permits. He got a variance, one of a kind, to build a private marina with direct ocean access, the only such approval granted in Cascadia Bay in 2 decades. I leaned over the table, my pulse quickening as I scanned the documents. The marina was a significant asset, no doubt, exclusive, prestigious, a jewel in any developer's crown. But as I traced the highlighted lines, I felt a flicker of skepticism. "Valuable, sure," I said, my voice steady but laced with caution. "But a marina alone doesn't shift the entire game." My mind was already racing, calculating the potential revenue streams, the market appeal, the logistical challenges. A marina was a luxury, not a revolution. Indira's eyes gleamed with a knowing spark, as if she'd anticipated my doubt. She flipped to another page with a flourish, her movements precise and deliberate. "The marina's just the surface," she said, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial hush. "The real prize is what the deep water access unlocks." She tapped a new document, this one stamped with the logo of Meridian Technologies. 3 months ago, they signed a preliminary agreement to make the Obsidian the coastal landing point for their Trans-Pacific data cable. This isn't just a pipeline, it's a digital artery straight to Asian markets. The room seemed to still, the weight of her words settling over us like a sudden fog. My breath caught as the implications unfurled in my mind. A data cable landing point wasn't just infrastructure, it was a linchpin, a strategic asset that could redefine the Obsidian's value. What we thought was a high-end residential project, teetering on the edge of financial distress, was now something far greater, a cornerstone of global digital connectivity. The property's worth wasn't just in its sleek condos or ocean views, it was in its potential to anchor a network that could generate revenue streams for decades. My heart thudded with a mix of awe and indignation. Everett had known this, and he'd kept it hidden. Zora, seated across from me, let out a soft exhale, her eyes wide with realization. "This changes everything," she murmured, her voice thick with a blend of excitement and disbelief. "The Obsidian isn't just real estate anymore. It's a digital fortress, a strategic asset." Her fingers twitched as if itching to start drafting plans, her mind already mapping out the possibilities. I nodded, but my thoughts were darkening, a storm brewing behind my calm exterior. "And Everett never breathed a word of this during our talks," I said, my voice tight with rising anger. "He pitched it as a struggling luxury development, a project desperate for capital, while secretly positioning it as critical infrastructure." The betrayal stung, sharp and personal. I'd known Everett's ambition was boundless, but this was a deliberate deception, a calculated move to undervalue the Obsidian while dangling it before us like bait. I grabbed my phone, my fingers trembling slightly as I snapped photos of the key documents. "Forward these to Lloyd Carson," I instructed Zora. "Tell him our original offer stands, but we're adjusting it. We'll increase the price for the Obsidian by 15%, but only if Everett discloses every agreement tied to the property, including the Meridian contract." Zora's fingers flew across her tablet, her brow furrowed in concentration as she composed the message. I turned back to the documents, my eyes lingering on the dates and signatures. The Meridian agreement had been inked just weeks after our divorce was finalized, a detail that hit me like a punch to the gut. Had Everett been laying the groundwork for this transformation while we were still married, presenting himself to me as a mere luxury developer? Or had this opportunity arisen only after we'd parted ways? Either way, the discovery crystallized something I'd long suspected about the man I'd once loved. His dreams were never about us, or even about building something lasting for others. They were about his own ascent, with everyone else, me included, serving as stepping stones to his glory. My phone buzzed, shattering the silence. Everett's name flashed on the screen, and my stomach twisted with a mix of anticipation and dread. Carson must have forwarded our message already. I accepted the call, switching to speaker so Indira and Zora could hear. "Hello, Everett," my voice cool and controlled, though my heart was pounding. "You know about Meridian Technologies," he said without preamble, his tone clipped, tightly wound. There was no warmth, no trace of the charm he'd once wielded so effortlessly, just the voice of a man cornered, but still dangerous. "I know you deliberately misrepresented the Obsidian's strategic value, though," I replied, my words measured but sharp. "That's a significant omission, wouldn't you say?" He didn't miss a beat. "The agreement's preliminary, non-binding," he said, as if that excused everything. "But it could transform the property's valuation." "Which you knew," I cut in, my voice rising slightly despite my efforts to stay calm. "You presented the Obsidian as a luxury project on the brink of collapse, when you were fully aware it could become essential digital infrastructure." His response was smooth, almost rehearsed. "Business negotiations always involve managing information strategically," he said, slipping into the confident developer persona I'd seen him wear countless times. "You'd have done the same." I clenched my jaw, his words stoking the fire of my anger. "Maybe," I conceded, my tone icy, "but I wouldn't have proposed a partnership while hiding a detail of this material. That's not strategy, Everett. That's deception." The line went quiet, the silence heavy with unspoken accusations. I could almost picture him on the other end, his jaw tight, his mind racing for a countermove. When I spoke again, my voice was firm, unyielding. "My offer stands. We'll pay the adjusted price for the Obsidian, contingent on full disclosure of all agreements. Your attorney has the details." Everett's laugh was short, humorless, a sound that grated against my nerves. "You're still undervaluing it, even with the adjustment," he said. "The Meridian contract alone could double the property's revenue potential. Only if the final agreement is signed and the infrastructure is built," I shot back. "Right now, you don't have the capital to finish the Obsidian's basic construction, let alone the specialized modifications for a data cable." Another silence. This one different, calculated, deliberate. When Everett spoke again, his voice had shifted, taking on a tone I recognized from the countless deals I'd watched him close during our marriage. It was his final stance, the moment before he either sealed the agreement or walked away. "I'll sell you everything," he said, "the entire remaining portfolio, including the Obsidian, at your adjusted offer price. But I have two non-negotiable conditions." I glanced at Zora, who had paused her typing, her eyes locked on me with intense focus. "I'm listening," I said, my voice steady despite the sudden spike of adrenaline. "First," he said, "public acknowledgement of my architectural vision for the Obsidian. My name stays on the building as its designer, no matter who owns it." His words dripped with pride, the same unrelenting ego that had always driven him. I could almost see the way his shoulders would square, his chin lifting as he staked his claim to immortality. "Acceptable," I said, "provided all marketing materials clearly state the current ownership." I wasn't about to let his name overshadow the reality of who controlled the project now. "And second," he continued, his voice softening slightly, "a seat on the development committee for the Obsidian's final phase, non-controlling, advisory only, but with guaranteed input on design decisions related to the Meridian integration." The request caught me off guard. I'd expected a clean break, a demand for cash or credit, not a bid to stay involved. I muted the phone, turning to my team. "Thoughts?" I asked, my mind already wrestling with the implications. Indira's eyes narrowed, her voice low and urgent. "It's a trap," she said. "He'll use that position to undermine you, drag out decisions, maybe even sabotage the project to protect his legacy or inflate his influence." Zora, ever the pragmatist, tilted her head, considering, or he genuinely wants to see his vision through, she said. The Meridian integration is complex. His expertise could save us time and mistakes. I weighed their words, my thoughts a tangle of suspicion and strategy. Everett's motives were never pure, but his knowledge was undeniable. An advisory role, tightly controlled, could be an asset if I could keep him in check. Unmuting the phone, I delivered my decision. Advisory position accepted with strict limits, I said. You will get project updates and can submit recommendations, but all final decisions stay with my team. Your involvement ends when the project is complete. These terms will be spelled out clearly in the acquisition agreement. Everett's exhale was audible, a sound that carried both relief and resignation. Have Carson draft the agreement, he said. We'll review and respond by noon tomorrow. The call ended and the room fell silent. My team stared at me, their expressions a mix of triumph and unease. Zora broke the quiet, her voice soft but pointed. You realize what just happened, right? You won. He's selling everything. I nodded, but the victory felt hollow, tinged with the bitter aftertaste of Everett's deception and the lingering question of what he might still be hiding. As I gathered the documents, my mind was already turning to the next steps, the contracts, the risks. The Obsidian was ours now, or nearly so, but the battle for control was far from over. The acquisition, the Obsidian silhouette pierced the Cascadia Bay skyline, its glass facade catching the sun's dying light. Thalia Cavos stood at the window, her eyes fixed on the building that had once been the heart of Everett Thornhill's empire. 8 months ago, the notion of seizing it, of claiming everything he'd built, had been a defiant whisper in her mind, born from the wreckage of his betrayal. Now the victory was hers, tangible and undeniable. Yet it didn't feel like triumph. Not yet. It felt like the first step in a far greater journey. Indira, her property manager, broke the silence. What do you mean the real challenge begins now? Her voice carried a mix of curiosity and concern, her practical mind wrestling with the enormity of their achievement. Thalia turned, a faint smile tugging at her lips. Acquiring the properties was a fight, Indira, but reshaping them, making them reflect my vision instead of his, that's the true battle. I want them to stand for something bigger, something that outlives his arrogance. The next 24 hours were a maelstrom of activity. Legal documents stacked high, each page a monument to months of meticulous planning. Financial transfers flowed through digital veins, and strategy sessions bled into the early hours. By evening, Lloyd Carson, Everett's corporate attorney, delivered the draft agreement. Its terms aligned with their negotiations, but Thalia spotted Carson's attempt to bolster Everett's advisory role, a subtle maneuver to preserve his influence. Zora Winters, Thalia's trusted friend and real estate attorney, saw it too. Her counterdraft was a masterstroke, neutering Carson's overreach with precision. By noon the following day, the final terms were locked in. The signing was scheduled for 4 p.m. at Harroven and Mitchell's offices, a formal end to a process that had begun in that same building just a day prior. Thalia prepared with care that afternoon, selecting an emerald green suit that clung to her frame, its clean lines projecting unyielding confidence. As she applied a final touch of lipstick, she met her own gaze in the mirror. The woman reflected there bore no resemblance to the Thalia who'd once defined herself as Everett Thornhill's wife. That version of her had been eroded by his affair with Belle, his dismissal of her worth. In her place stood someone new, someone with a spine of steel and eyes that burned with purpose. She'd rebuilt herself, piece by piece, and the mirror held only the truth of her transformation. At Harroven Mitchell's, the conference room was arranged with surgical precision. Stacks of acquisition documents sat at each place setting, their neat edges a silent promise of closure. Zora was already there, conferring quietly with the paralegal handling the filings. She looked up as Thalia entered, offering a nod that grounded her. Everything in order? Thalia asked, placing her portfolio on the table. All set, Zora confirmed, her voice calm but resolute. Funds are queued for transfer once signatures are verified. Deeds will be filed electronically immediately after. Thalia took her seat, her outward composure belying the weight of the moment. This was more than a deal. It was the culmination of 8 months of strategy, sacrifice, and self-discovery. It was the reclamation of her narrative. The door opened and Everett entered, flanked by Carson and Marcus Webb, his financial restructuring expert. He'd dressed formally in a charcoal suit that hung slightly loose, the toll of recent months carved into his frame. Their eyes locked for a brief moment, his expression unreadable, a fortress of control. He took his seat across from her, the table a silent divide. Carson began, his voice measured as he outlined the agreement. The complete acquisition of Thornhill Properties, including the Obsidian, Everett's limited advisory role, the retention of his name as the architectural designer, and the financial terms they'd battled over. Thalia watched Everett as Carson spoke, noting the tension in his jaw, the careful restraint in his posture. This moment was a reckoning for him. The empire he'd built, the identity he'd wrapped around it, was crumbling. For a fleeting second, she felt a pang of empathy. She knew the pain of having your sense of self torn apart. She'd lived it when his affair shattered their marriage, when his arrogance reduced her to an accessory. But empathy didn't dull her purpose. This was her justice, earned through grit and guile. Carson finished, sliding the main agreement across the table. If there are no further questions, we'll proceed with signatures. Everett lifted his pen, hesitating for a fraction of a second. Then, with the bold flourish Thalia had seen on countless contracts and their marriage license, he signed his name. He passed the document to her without a word. Thalia took the pen, her hand steady as she wrote her name beneath his. The act was mundane, yet monumental, a quiet earthquake that reshaped their world. With those signatures, Thornhill Properties was no longer his. The empire he'd spent a decade forging was hers. The signing continued, each document transferring another piece of his legacy to her ownership. Everett maintained his composure, speaking only to confirm clauses, his voice clipped but professional. When the final page was signed, Carson nodded to Webb, who initiated the electronic funds transfer. Thalia's phone chimed moments later, her bank confirming the transaction's completion. "Congratulations, Ms. Cavos," Carson said, his tone formal. "The acquisition is complete." The words hung in the air, a quiet toll marking the end of one chapter and the start of another. Everett rose, buttoning his jacket with emotion honed by years of boardroom rituals, but his eyes betrayed the weight of this defeat. "I'll have my office send the Obsidian's design files," he said, his voice professionally detached, "including the preliminary modifications for Meridian Technologies." Thalia nodded, her tone equally measured. "Thank you. My team will review them and establish a protocol for your advisory input." He extended his hand, the gesture almost mechanical. "Congratulations, Thalia. You've accomplished something remarkable." She shook his hand, the contact brief but final, like sealing a vault she'd never reopen. "Thank you, Everett." As he turned to leave, a sudden impulse stirred in Thalia, a need for closure beyond the sterile formality of contracts. "Everett," she said softly. He paused, glancing back. "For what it's worth, I hope you find success in what comes next. Just maybe with a better understanding of the people around you." A complex emotion flickered across his face, regret perhaps, or an acknowledgement of her truth. "I won't make the same mistakes again," he said quietly. "That I can promise." Then he was gone, Carson and Webb following in his wake. When the door closed, Zora exhaled, her tension unraveling. "It's done. Every property that bore the Thornhill name is yours now." Thalia nodded, the reality settling into her bones like a quiet tide. "Yes, and now the real work begins." They gathered their documents and headed for the elevator. As the door slid shut, Zora studied her, curiosity in her gaze. "No victory party? You've done exactly what you set out to do." Thalia smiled, her thoughts drifting to the Obsidian's perch, its commanding view of the bay stretching toward possibility. "The celebration comes when these properties become something extraordinary. That's the victory I'm after." The coastline stretched before me, a ribbon of possibility that now belonged to me in a way that felt profoundly real. I stood at the edge of this new chapter, my mind already racing with the tasks ahead, development plans to refine, a committee to form, and the intricate web of a data cable infrastructure to weave into the existing framework. Celebration could wait. The horizon was calling, and I was ready to answer. Zora, my confidant and ally, let out a soft laugh, her eyes glinting with amusement. Always chasing the next big thing, aren't you? She teased, her voice warm but knowing. I smiled, shaking my head as the elevator hummed its descent. Everett never really saw me, did he? I murmured, the words carrying a weight I hadn't fully unpacked until now. No, I answered myself, my voice steadier. But I see myself clearly now. Outside, the afternoon sun bathed Cascadia Bay in a golden glow, the water sparkling with unspoken promises, each wave a reminder of the future I was crafting. Somewhere along that same shoreline, Everett Thornhill was grappling with a reality far removed from the empire he'd once dreamed of ruling. His vision had crumbled, and in its place I was building my own. One property, one choice, one deliberate step at a time. By morning, the news of my acquisition had erupted across industry channels, a tidal wave of headlines and speculation. The Meridian Business Journal led with a bold declaration: Thalia Cavos acquires full Thornhill portfolio. Beneath it, subheadings dissected the deal's estimated value and probed my intentions, particularly for the crown jewel, the Obsidian. A photograph from the Cascadia Bay property showcase accompanied the article, capturing me in a midnight blue gown, its structural details echoing in the coastline itself. In the image, I stared directly at the camera, my gaze radiating a confidence that felt both innate and hard-won, as if it had been there all along, waiting for me to claim it. My phone buzzed relentlessly from 6:30 a.m., a chorus of journalists, industry peers, and even old friends who had navigated the delicate balance of loyalty during my divorce from Everett. I let the calls pile up in voicemail, my focus elsewhere. Instead, I pored over the files Everett had sent detailing the Obsidian's integration with Meridian technologies. The plans were nothing short of extraordinary, visionary even. Everett had envisioned a seamless blend of cutting-edge data cable landing facilities and the opulent residential units above, a marriage of function and beauty. The engineering hurdles were daunting, yet the solutions were elegant, a testament to the meticulous, uncompromising approach that had first drawn me to his work years ago. I lingered over the schematics, tracing the lines of his ambition, feeling a pang of nostalgia for the man I'd once believed in, now tempered by the clarity of who I'd become. The morning found me at the Perch, our makeshift headquarters, with Indira and two newly recruited project managers. The dining table had transformed into a war room, strewn with architectural renderings, construction timelines, and market analysis for each property in my newly expanded portfolio. Indira, ever the strategist, leaned forward, her fingers brushing a stack of documents still branded with the Thornhill Properties logo. We need to unify the branding now, she urged, her voice crisp with purpose. Public perception will make or break this transition. I nodded, studying the mock-ups her team had prepared for Cavos Coastal Holdings, the new identity we'd crafted in secret over the past month. The design featured a stylized lighthouse silhouette, a subtle homage to the Perch, the place where this journey had begun. It was more than a logo, it was a beacon, a symbol of guidance and resilience. Start with the digital assets and property signage, I directed, my tone measured but firm. But sync with the PR team on the rollout. This rebrand should feel like evolution, not erasure. Indira scribbled notes, her focus unwavering, while I felt a quiet thrill at the thought of reshaping an empire in my image. Maya, my assistant, slipped into the room, her tablet glowing with the morning social media report. The acquisition was dominating regional business circles, sparking a spectrum of reactions from sober analysis to juicy gossip. What caught my attention most were the messages from women in the industry, quiet notes of solidarity, congratulations laced with a shared understanding, and tentative inquiries about potential partnerships. The Women's Business Alliance wants you to speak at their quarterly leadership forum, Maya announced, her voice tinged with excitement. The theme is Reclaiming Spaces, Women in Male-Dominated Industries. I paused, the invitation stirring something deep within me. Until now, I'd operated in the shadows, my focus on strategy rather than spotlight. This acquisition had changed that, thrusting me into a visibility I hadn't sought but could now wield. Except provisionally, I decided, my mind already mapping the timeline. After we've stabilized the Obsidian's transition, and Maya, Set up meetings with the existing property management teams for all the new sites. I want face-to-face introductions before we announce any changes. Maya nodded, her task list growing, and slipped out as Zora arrived, her expression a mix of curiosity and amusement. "Have you seen this?" Zora asked, handing me her phone. On the screen was a press release, issued not by Thornhill Properties' corporate team, but by Everett's personal publicist. It was brief but strikingly gracious. "After a decade of shaping Cascadia Bay, I am pleased to see my portfolio, including the Obsidian, pass into the capable hands of Thalia Cavos. Ms. Cavos brings unparalleled vision and strategic insight to coastal development, and I am confident the properties will thrive under her leadership. I look forward to my advisory role in the Obsidian's final phase and to witnessing Cascadia Bay's continued growth." I read it twice, searching for the subtle digs or passive-aggressive undertones I'd braced for. Finding none, I handed the phone back, my brow furrowed. "Surprisingly generous," I said, my voice tinged with skepticism. Zora shrugged, a wry smile playing on her lips. Maybe losing it all gave him some clarity, or his PR team forced him to take the high road to salvage his image. "Maybe," I murmured, though something in the statement's tone felt authentically Everett. The focus on vision, the nod to capability. It was how he'd spoken of respected rivals, never of me during our marriage. The realization stung, but I pushed it aside, turning to the construction timeline for the Obsidian. The project had lagged during Everett's financial turmoil, with key contractors placing liens over unpaid bills. Those debts were now settled through the acquisition funding, but the challenge remained: rebuilding trust with subcontractors who'd been burned. As the afternoon waned, I prepared for my first official site visit as the Obsidian's new owner. It was no random choice. The Obsidian was the portfolio's linchpin, both financially and personally. It represented everything I'd fought for, everything I was becoming. As I stepped toward the door, the weight of the moment settled over me, not as a burden, but as a mantle, one I was ready to wear. The visit to the Obsidian construction site had been deliberately planned with little forewarning, a strategic choice that allowed me, Ms. Cavos, to witness the project in its raw, unpolished state, free from the gloss of a rehearsed performance. As my car rolled toward the site's entrance, the morning sun glinted off the towering skeletal structure, casting long shadows across the gravel lot. A prominent Thornhill Properties sign stood at the perimeter, its bold lettering a stark reminder of the recent shift in ownership. The site stirred a complex mix of emotions within me: pride in acquiring such a bold venture, tempered by the weight of responsibility to steer it toward success where its former visionary had faltered. At the gate, the security guard, a middle-aged man with weathered hands, scrutinized my ID with a flicker of astonishment. His eyes widened slightly, as if the notion of the new owner arriving alone, without a retinue of assistants or advisors, defied his expectations. I could sense his curiosity, perhaps wondering what kind of leader I would be compared to the larger-than-life Everett Thornhill. Smiling politely, I thanked him and drove through, my mind already racing with the day's objectives: assess the project's progress, evaluate the team, and assert my vision without alienating those still loyal to the old regime. Eli Marshall, the site manager, awaited me at the construction office, a cluster of trailers nestled at the base of the rising tower. The trailers were adorned with vibrant architectural renderings and meticulously detailed schedules, a testament to the ambition driving the Obsidian. Eli, a seasoned professional who had worked under Everett for nearly 5 years, greeted me with a handshake that was firm but measured. His face was a mask of professionalism, his eyes betraying nothing of his thoughts about the ownership change. Yet I couldn't help but wonder what lay beneath that neutral expression. Did he resent my arrival, viewing me as an outsider dismantling his former boss's legacy? Or was he cautiously optimistic, hoping I'd bring stability to a project teetering on the edge of financial strain? "Ms. Cavos, welcome to the Obsidian," Eli said, his voice steady. "We've mapped out a tour that balances a comprehensive view of the construction progress with strict safety protocols." His words were carefully chosen, a blend of courtesy and efficiency, but I sensed a trace of apprehension, as if he were testing the waters with this new owner. "Thank you, Mr. Marshall," I replied, my tone warm yet authoritative. Before we start, I'd like to dive into the updated timeline for the Meridian Technologies integration. I understand it's been a significant hurdle. The question was deliberate, a signal that I wasn't here for a superficial walkthrough, but to tackle the project's core challenges head-on. A brief flicker of surprise crossed Eli's face, his eyebrows lifting ever so slightly. Was it my knowledge of the technical details that caught him off guard, or my focus on problem-solving over pleasantries? Either way, I felt a quiet satisfaction in unsettling his assumptions. Eli led me to a conference room inside one of the trailers, its walls covered with intricate schematic drawings that mapped the Obsidian's complex systems. The air was thick with the scent of fresh ink and coffee, a space where countless decisions had been debated. Pointing to specific sections of the schematics, Eli explained, the Meridian integration requires retrofitting 3 lower levels to accommodate specialized tech infrastructure. The challenge lies in coordinating these installations without delaying the luxury finishing work on the residential floors above. His voice was calm, but I detected a trace of frustration, perhaps at the compromises he'd been forced to make under Everett's exacting standards. As I studied the schematics, my eyes lingered on the cooling system routings, their paths twisting in ways that seemed unnecessarily elaborate. These routings, fine, I said, tapping the diagram, they strike me as overly complicated. Was there a structural necessity for this design, or was it driven by other considerations? My question was pointed, probing not just the design, but the decision-making culture that had shaped it. Eli hesitated, his fingers pausing on the edge of the table. Mr. Thornhill had very specific aesthetic requirements for all mechanical systems, even those hidden from public view, he said carefully. He believed every detail, visible or not, should reflect the building's design integrity. There was a hint of admiration in his tone, but also a subtle weariness, as if he'd spent years navigating the tension between Everett's idealism and practical realities. I nodded, acknowledging the philosophy while inwardly questioning its cost. It's a noble idea, I said, but in practice it risks inefficiency. Please have the engineering team explore alternative routings that prioritize operational functionality while still respecting the design ethos. My words were firm, a clear directive, but I kept my tone collaborative, hoping to signal that I valued Eli's expertise even as I reshaped the project's priorities. Inside, I felt a surge of determination to streamline the Obsidian's complexities without sacrificing its grandeur, a delicate balance that would define my leadership. As we embarked on the tour, navigating the partially completed structure, I absorbed the scale of Everett's vision. The Obsidian was breathtaking, its steel framework soaring against the skyline, but I noted areas where his perfectionism had introduced unnecessary obstacles. Exposed ductwork in one section, designed to meet aesthetic ideals, complicated future maintenance. Intricate lighting fixtures in another area, while stunning, had delayed electrical work. Each observation fueled my resolve to honor the project's ambition while grounding it in pragmatism. Yet, I couldn't shake the awareness of Eli's watchful gaze, wondering if he saw my critiques as a rejection of his former mentor's legacy or a necessary evolution. The tour culminated at the future site of the Obsidian's rooftop restaurant, an open concrete expanse with panoramic views of Cascadia Bay. Construction materials were neatly stacked along one wall, but the space felt alive with potential. The coastline stretching from the historic Lighthouse District to the marina development in the south. Standing at the edge, I felt a rush of awe at the vista, the ocean's shimmer mirroring the possibilities of this project. The perch, my own development, was just visible in the distance, its silhouette a quiet reminder of the journey that had brought me here, from an underdog developer to the owner of this audacious venture. This view was Mr. Thornhill's guiding star, Eli said, gesturing toward the horizon. The entire building was oriented to maximize these sightlines. His voice carried a note of pride, but also a hint of melancholy, as if he were mourning the shift away from Everett's singular vision. It's flawless, I agreed, turning to face him. But the current restaurant layout buries too many tables away from the windows. I'd like to rework the design to ensure more diners can experience this view directly. My suggestion was practical, driven by a belief that the Obsidian's magic lay in sharing its beauty with as many people as possible. Yet I also felt a pang of empathy for Eli, knowing each change I proposed might feel like a step away from the project he'd poured years into. Eli tapped a note into his tablet, his movements precise. Then, after a brief pause, he said, "Some of these changes might clash with Mr. Thornhill's advisory input. His agreement allows him to remain involved in design decisions." His tone was neutral, but I sensed a test. Would I defer to Everett's lingering influence or assert my own authority? Mr. Thornhill's advisory role is confined to the Meridian Technologies integration, I clarified, my voice steady but firm. All other design decisions rest with me as the owner. Please ensure your team understands that distinction. The words felt weighty, a declaration of my intent to lead decisively. Inside, I grappled with the challenge of navigating Everett's shadow. His vision had built this project, but his overreach had nearly sunk it. My task was to carve a new path while respecting the foundation he'd laid. Eli nodded, his expression unreadable, though I imagined a swirl of conflicting loyalties within him. As a longtime Thornhill employee, he must have felt torn between honoring his former boss and adapting to my leadership. I decided to address that tension directly. "Mr. Marshall, I want to acknowledge your professionalism during this transition," I said as we returned to the site office. "Your continuity is invaluable, and I hope you'll stay on as we move forward with our revised vision." His surprise was unmistakable this time, his eyes searching mine. "You're not replacing the team with your own people?" he asked, a trace of disbelief in his voice. "I believe in assessing talent before making changes," I replied. "Your expertise is an asset, provided you're aligned with our new priorities and timeline." My words were both an olive branch and a challenge, inviting him to join me in reshaping the Obsidian's future. Internally, I felt a flicker of hope that Eli's knowledge could bridge the gap between Everett's era and mine. Eli studied me for a moment, his guarded demeanor softening slightly. "I'm committed to seeing the Obsidian completed to the highest standards, Ms. Cavos," he said. "If your vision upholds that commitment, I'm in." His words carried a quiet resolve, and I sensed a shift, a tentative willingness to trust my leadership. "Excellent," I said, smiling. "Please prepare a detailed status report on all active work streams, flagging any decision points needing immediate attention. We'll reconvene next week to set clear communication protocols and updated completion targets." The directive was clear, but I infused it with warmth, hoping to foster a partnership rather than a hierarchy. As I left the site, I noticed workers pausing to watch me, their curiosity palpable. Word of my visit had spread, and I could almost hear the whispers that would follow. Speculation about my plans, worries about job security, debates over whether I could fill Everett's shoes. The thought was daunting, but it also fueled my determination. The coming weeks would be a crucible, testing my ability to establish myself not as Everett's successor, but as a leader with my own vision. The Obsidian's success hinged on balancing its artistic integrity with financial and operational viability, a challenge I was ready to embrace. Back at the Perch, my own development, I found Indira, my trusted colleague, sifting through applications for our expanding management team. The acquisition of the Obsidian had nearly tripled our portfolio overnight, thrusting us into a new league of responsibility. As I settled into my office, the distant silhouette of the Obsidian loomed on the horizon, a symbol of the ambition and risk now resting on my shoulders. Yet, beneath the pressure, I felt a quiet thrill, the chance to redefine a landmark, to prove my mettle, and to build something enduring. As I stepped into the sleek, modern kitchen of our headquarters, the faint hum of productivity greeted me. Indira was already there, her eyes fixed on her tablet, her fingers deftly navigating the screen. The air carried the subtle aroma of freshly brewed tea, a small comfort amid the weight of our ambitious undertakings. "How did the site visit go?" she asked, her voice calm but laced with curiosity as she glanced up, her expression a mix of expectation and knowing patience. I moved toward the counter, reaching for the teapot, its warmth grounding me as I poured a steaming cup. "Eye-opening," I said, the word carrying more weight than I intended. "The Obsidian is even grander than I recalled. Its scale, its audacity, but it's also more troubled than I expected." I paused, letting the steam curl around my face, the memory of the visit vivid. Everett's relentless pursuit of perfection has tangled several critical systems. His vision was bold, but it's left us with knots to untangle. The words felt heavy, tinged with both admiration for his ambition and frustration at the impracticality he'd woven into the project. Indira gave a slow, knowing nod, her lips curving into a wry smile. "That's Everett for you," she said, her tone carrying the weight of years spent navigating his brilliance and his flaws. He could never quite separate the line between groundbreaking and unfeasible. She slid a folder across the counter, its edges crisp against the polished surface. On that note, the advisory team has put together a detailed proposal for the Obsidian's interior redesign. They've woven in your feedback from our earlier talks. I opened the folder, my fingers brushing against the smooth renderings inside. The images revealed a reimagined version of Everett's original vision, one that preserved the architectural skeleton but breathed new life into its spaces. The redesign prioritized functionality without sacrificing elegance, softening the cold grandeur of Everett's concept with warmer tones and thoughtful details. The public areas in particular caught my eye. Local materials like weathered cedar and handcrafted stone, paired with artwork from Cascadia Bay's artists, replaced the imported marble and sterile luxury Everett had favored. It was as if the building had finally found its place, rooted in the community rather than looming above it. "This feels right," I said, my voice softening as I traced the lines of a rendering. A quiet satisfaction bloomed within me, a sense that we were honoring the Obsidian's bones while giving it a soul that resonated with Cascadia Bay. It respects the original design's strength, but makes the spaces feel like they belong here, like they're part of the Bay's story, not just dropped into it. Indira's eyes lit up, her posture straightening with quiet pride. "That's exactly what we were aiming for," she said. "A building that celebrates its place in the world rather than trying to overshadow it." She leaned forward, her voice taking on a spark of enthusiasm. "Speaking of which, the environmental consultants are coming tomorrow. They're bringing some fascinating ideas for water reclamation systems, innovations that could become a defining feature of Cavos Coastal Holdings' brand." The mention of branding jolted me back to another pressing matter, one that had been simmering in the back of my mind. "Has the PR team finalized the announcement for the consolidated portfolio?" I asked, my tone shifting to one of focus. Indira nodded, reaching into her briefcase to retrieve another folder, this one thicker, brimming with intent. "Draft press release, media talking points, and a proposed timeline for the rollout," she said, handing it to me. "They're suggesting a formal event at the Obsidian site once the new signage is up, a symbolic moment to reclaim our flagship property." I flipped through the materials, my eyes scanning the carefully crafted words. The press release struck a delicate balance, acknowledging the property's storied past while heralding the fresh direction under my leadership. A quote attributed to me stood out, capturing the heart of what I wanted to convey. "These properties are more than primarily real estate. They're the living narrative of Cascadia Bay. Under Cavos Coastal Holdings, they'll become true community treasures, bold in their ambition, respectful of the environment, luxurious yet deeply tied to the region's spirit and needs." The words felt like a promise, one I was determined to keep. "Perfect," I said, a quiet resolve settling over me. "Schedule the announcement for next Tuesday, and arrange site visits to all the other properties before then. I need to know every inch of this portfolio firsthand before I stand up and speak about our vision." The thought of stepping into the public eye as the face of Cavos Coastal Holdings sent a flicker of anticipation through me, laced with the weight of responsibility. The next morning, as I sipped my coffee and scrolled through my phone, a text from Dominic stopped me cold. "Thought you should know. Everett's leaving Cascadia Bay. Accepted a role with Singapore Development Group. Starts next month." The words hit like a quiet shockwave, logical yet unexpected. Everett had always been a chameleon, quick to adapt when the wind shifted. With his reputation in Cascadia Bay complicated by the high-profile acquisition of his properties, a move abroad made strategic sense. Yet, as I stared at the screen, a pang of something unnameable tugged at me. Regret, perhaps, or the sense of a door closing more firmly than I'd anticipated. Everett's departure felt like the end of an era, one I hadn't fully reconciled with. I forwarded the message to Zora, my note brief but pointed. "How does this impact his advisory role for the Obsidian?" Her reply was swift, pragmatic. "Contract allows for remote consultation. He's still bound by the terms regardless of where he is. The assurance was cold comfort, but it steadied me. The Obsidian was mine to shape now, with or without Everett's physical presence. By afternoon, the news of Everett's exit had rippled through Cascadia Bay's tight-knit business community. A terse statement from his publicist confirmed it, framing the move as a bold step to bring West Coast design to Asian luxury markets. There was no mention of me or the acquisition, only a polished narrative of career progression. It was classic Everett, always in control of the story, even when the ground shifted beneath him. That evening, as I sat in my office, the glow of my laptop casting shadows across the room, an email from Everett himself appeared in my inbox. The subject line was simple: Singapore. My breath caught as I opened it, unsure what to expect. The message was brief, but carried a weight I hadn't anticipated. Thalia, you've likely heard about my new role in Singapore. I wanted you to know directly that I remain fully committed to my advisory role for the Obsidian. Distance won't affect my availability for consultations on the Meridian Technologies integration. On a personal note, seeing you at the Cascadia Bay Property Showcase was illuminating in ways I'm still grappling with. You were always extraordinary. I just failed to see it clearly. Everett. I read it again, then a third time, each pass stirring a tangle of emotions. Was this professional courtesy, a bid for reconciliation, or Everett's way of holding on to the Obsidian, his unfinished masterpiece? Perhaps it was all three, woven together with the complexity that had always defined him. His words about me, extraordinary, lingered, stirring memories of our shared past, the moments when we'd been allies, rivals, and something more. But those days were gone, and the ache they left was dull, not sharp. After a long pause, I crafted a reply, my fingers steady but deliberate. Everett, congratulations on the Singapore role. I appreciate your continued commitment to the Obsidian and will ensure you're kept in the loop on the Meridian Technologies integration per our agreement. Wishing you success in this new chapter. Thalia. The words were measured, professional, with just enough warmth to acknowledge his gesture without inviting more. Sending it felt like closing a chapter, not with a slam, but with a quiet, resolute click. With Everett's departure looming, my focus sharpened on building Cavos Coastal Holdings into something distinct, not just a rebranded version of Thornhill Properties. The next 2 weeks were a blur of motion. Site visits to every property in the portfolio, each revealing its own challenges and potential. Meetings with management teams. Their faces a mix of curiosity and cautious optimism. And deep dives with the Meridian Technologies crew to map out the data cable infrastructure. Every step felt like laying the foundation for something enduring, a legacy that would outlast the ghosts of Everett's era. The announcement event was set for Tuesday morning and at the Obsidian site, where the new Cavos Coastal Holding signage had been installed under the cover of night. The stylized lighthouse logo now gleamed where Thornhill Properties mark had once stood, a beacon of our new direction. As I prepared to step into the spotlight, a quiet certainty settled over me. This was more than a business venture. It was a chance to redefine Cascadia Bay's future, to weave its past and present into something extraordinary. And I was ready to lead the way. For years, the angular emblem had towered over Cascadia Bay, a silent sentinel of ambition and prestige. Today, it was the backdrop for a pivotal moment, one I'd been preparing for with equal parts anticipation and apprehension. The morning air was crisp, the sky a pale canvas behind the Obsidian's jagged, half-finished silhouette. I arrived at the site well before the guests, craving a few quiet moments to steady my nerves. This wasn't just a presentation. It was a public declaration of my vision for Cavos Coastal Holdings, a vision that would redefine the luxury landscape of this coastal city. The weight of it pressed against my chest, a mix of pride and the gnawing fear of scrutiny. I wanted everything to be flawless. The site had been transformed for the occasion. A modest stage faced the skeletal structure of the Obsidian, its sharp angles catching the morning light in a way that felt both imposing and exhilarating. Display boards lined the perimeter, each one meticulously designed to showcase our plans, sleek renderings of the reimagined portfolio with bold emphasis on sustainability, community connection, and cutting-edge technology. Every detail had been agonized over, from the font on the boards to the placement of the refreshment table. This wasn't just about aesthetics. It was about signaling a new era, one that I was determined to lead with confidence and clarity. As I walked the grounds, my heels clicking softly against the temporary flooring, Marshall approached me at the entrance. He looked out of place in his pressed suit, the formal attire a stark contrast to the dusty work boots and hard hat he usually wore. His broad shoulders seemed to strain against the fabric, as if the suit itself was a reminder of the unfamiliar role he was stepping into today. "Everything's ready, Miss Cavos," he said, his voice steady but tinged with unease. "The team's got the presentation materials set up exactly as you wanted." I could sense his discomfort, not just with the suit, but with the spotlight I'd asked him to share. Marshall was a man of plans and blueprints, not podiums and polished speeches. Still, his presence was crucial. Having the project manager speak to the technical details would ground our vision and credibility, showing continuity in a project that had already seen too much upheaval. "Thank you, Eli," I said, offering a warm smile to ease his tension. "And thank you for agreeing to speak today. Your voice carries weight with the team and the stakeholders. It shows we're committed to getting this right." He nodded, a flicker of relief crossing his face, though I could tell he was still adjusting to my leadership style. Where Everett had ruled with ironclad directives, I preferred collaboration, open communication, a chance for every voice to be heard. It was a shift that had unsettled some of the old guard, but Marshall's response told me it was working. "The crew's appreciated," he said, rubbing the back of his neck. "The clarity, I mean. It's cut down on the rumors and anxiety about the transition." His words bolstered me, a small reminder that the changes I was fighting for were taking root. As we moved toward the presentation area, I caught sight of Zora near the refreshment table. Her vibrant energy, a stark contrast to the stiff postures of the local officials she was charming. Her laughter carried across the space, but when her eyes met mine, her expression shifted. Something serious, almost urgent. She excused herself and hurried over, her heels clicking with purpose. "We have an unexpected situation," she said in a low voice, guiding me toward a quiet corner of the site. My stomach tightened, bracing for bad news. "Ever's here." The words hit like a cold wave. Everett, here, at this announcement of all places. My mind raced, replaying the careful choreography of this event, now disrupted by his presence. "He showed up about 10 minutes ago," Zora continued, her voice steady but laced with concern. "Says he's exercising his right as advisory consultant to stay informed on project developments." I blinked, processing the implications. Technically, he was within his rights. His contract as a consultant gave him access to project-related events. But this? This felt calculated, a deliberate move to unsettle me on a day that was meant to be mine. I could picture him standing somewhere nearby, his sharp gaze scanning the crowd, testing the waters of my authority. "Where is he now?" I asked, keeping my voice even despite the churn of emotions. Surprise, irritation, and a faint echo of the old hurt I thought I'd buried. "Talking with some contractors near the building entrance," Zora replied. "He's keeping a low profile, but people have noticed." Of course they had. Everett Thornhill wasn't the kind of man who blended into a crowd. His presence was a gravitational force, pulling attention whether he wanted it or not. I took a deep breath, weighing my options. Asking him to leave would be a mistake. It would draw eyes, spark whispers, and give the impression I was rattled. Ignoring him entirely would make me look petty, as if I couldn't handle his shadow looming over my moment. No, I needed to reclaim this narrative. "Incorporate him," I said finally, the decision crystallizing with a clarity that steadied me. Add a brief acknowledgement of his architectural vision to my remarks. Reserve a seat for him, not on stage, but not tucked away in the back either. Let's show confidence, not exclusion. Zora's eyes lit with approval, a faint smile tugging at her lips. "Handled with grace," she said, already turning to make the arrangements. Her confidence in me was a lifeline, a reminder that I wasn't navigating this alone. As guests began to arrive, community leaders, stakeholders, a handful of carefully selected media, I moved through the crowd, shaking hands and exchanging warm greetings. Many of these people had dealt primarily with Everett in the past, and I could feel their curiosity, their unspoken questions about how I'd fill his shoes. I kept my smile steady, my tone warm but authoritative, determined to build trust where his influence had once dominated. Out of the corner of my eye, I caught glimpses of Everett on the edges of the gathering, his presence a quiet challenge. He was watching, not just the crowd but me, measuring the ease with which I connected with his former contacts. Each laugh I drew, each nod of agreement, felt like a small victory, a reclaiming of space. At exactly 10 o'clock, Maya signaled that it was time. I stepped onto the stage, my heart pounding, but my expression composed. The crowd before me was a tapestry of familiar faces and new players, all here to witness the future of Cascadia Bay's most iconic properties. I took a moment to survey them, grounding myself in the significance of this moment. "Good morning, Everett," I began, my voice clear and confident, cutting through the morning air. "Thank you for joining us at this pivotal moment for Cavos Coastal Holdings and Cascadia Bay itself. Today isn't just about a change in ownership. It's about an evolution in vision, a commitment to responsible luxury, sustainability, and community integration." As I laid out our plans detailing the innovative designs and forward-thinking technologies that would define our portfolio, I was acutely aware of Everett in the front row. His face was a mask of neutrality, but I knew him well enough to read the subtle tension in his posture. When I reached the part of my speech about the Obsidian, I paused, letting the moment breathe. "The Obsidian represents architectural ambition at its finest," I said, my tone deliberate. "Its structural design, originally envisioned by Everett Thornhill, is a landmark that will shape Cascadia Bay's waterfront for generations. Under Cavos Coastal Holdings, we will honor that vision while enhancing its sustainability, functionality, and integration with the latest technologies." I caught the slight shift in Everett's expression. Not quite a smile, but a softening, a grudging acknowledgement of the respect I'd extended. It wasn't about appeasing him. It was about showing the room that I could rise above personal history, that my leadership was defined by strength and inclusivity. The rest of the presentation unfolded seamlessly. Marshall took the stage, his gruff sincerity lending weight to the technical details of the construction timeline. Indira followed, her passion for our property management philosophy sparking nods of approval from the crowd. Finally, a representative from Meridian Technologies spoke, underscoring the regional impact of the data cable project. Each piece fit together, a testament to the team I'd built and the vision we shared. The question and answer session brought the inevitable. A local reporter, sensing the undercurrent of drama, stood and asked, "Ms. Cavos, given the unique circumstances of this acquisition following your divorce from Mr. Thornhill, how would you characterize the nature of this business transition?" The room fell silent, all eyes on me. I felt Everett shift in his seat, perhaps bracing for how I'd navigate the minefield of our shared history. I let a small, confident smile curve my lips. "I'd characterize it as a testament to the power of accurate valuation," I said, my voice light but firm. "In business, as in life, success comes from recognizing the true worth of assets others have underestimated. Cascadia Bay's premier properties deserve leadership that sees their full potential, and Cavos Coastal Holdings is here to deliver exactly that." The response drew appreciative nods from the business leaders in the room, who recognized the deft sidestep of personal drama in favor of professional clarity. The reporter, undeterred, pressed further. "And how would you describe your current working relationship with Mr. Thornhill, given his advisory role on the Obsidian?" I kept my gaze steady, my tone smooth. "Professional, focused, and appropriately limited to his areas of technical expertise," I replied. "The Obsidian's success benefits all stakeholders, including Mr. Thornhill as its original architect. Our agreement reflects that shared commitment." As the presentation wrapped up, attendees were invited to view the detailed renderings displayed around the site. The air buzzed with conversation, a mix of excitement and curiosity about the future we'd outlined. I moved through the crowd again, answering questions and accepting congratulations. But beneath it all, I felt a quiet triumph. I'd faced Everett's presence, the weight of our past, and the scrutiny of this moment, and I'd come through stronger. Today wasn't just about a portfolio or a project. It was about proving, to myself as much as to the world, that I was ready to lead. As I wove through the vibrant crowd at the re-announcement event, a glass of sparkling water in hand, I felt the pulse of anticipation thrumming through the room. The air buzzed with murmured conversations, the clink of glasses, and the faint hum of excitement as stakeholders and reporters mingled. My role was clear: answer questions with precision, forge connections with influential figures, and steer the narrative toward the bold future of Kyle's coastal holdings. Yet beneath my composed exterior, a quiet storm of emotions churned: pride in what I'd built, a flicker of apprehension about the scrutiny, and the weight of a past that still lingered in the shadows of this moment. Then, as I'd anticipated with a mix of dread and inevitability, Everett appeared before me. His presence was like a sudden shift in the wind, subtle but impossible to ignore. "Nicely handled," he said, his voice low, almost conspiratorial, as he nodded toward the dispersing reporters I just deftly redirected. "You've always had a knack for sidestepping tough questions." His words carried a faint edge, not quite praise, not quite critique, stirring a ripple of irritation in me. But I kept my face neutral, my voice steady. "Thank you for being here, Everett," I replied, matching his measured tone. "Your attendance sends a strong signal about the project's continuity." Inside, I felt a tug of curiosity about the man standing before me, no longer the untouchable architect of an empire, but someone navigating his own uncharted path. He inclined his head, his gaze drifting toward the skeletal frame of the Obsidian rising against the skyline. "The changes you've proposed are sharp," he said, his tone softening just enough to catch me off guard. "The sustainability upgrades to the water systems, in particular, are forward-thinking." The compliment landed heavily, stirring a mix of validation and unease. Everett, the original visionary of the Obsidian, was acknowledging my work. "High praise from the man who designed it," I said, allowing a small smile to soften the formality. "Will you have time to review the Meridian Technologies integration updates before you leave for Singapore?" My question was practical, but beneath it lay a curiosity I couldn't fully suppress. What was driving him to this new chapter halfway across the world? "Already done," he replied, his efficiency almost dismissive. "I sent my notes to Marshall yesterday." A pause followed, heavy with unspoken thoughts. Then, as if sensing my unspoken questions, he added, "Singapore's 14 hours ahead of Cascadia Bay, but I'm committed to my advisory role. Distance won't change that." His words were firm, but I caught a flicker of something in his eyes. Resignation, perhaps, or a quiet resolve. I nodded, maintaining the professional veneer that had defined our interactions since I'd acquired his properties. "I appreciate that," I said, though my mind was racing. Was Singapore an escape from the wreckage of his past, a bold leap toward opportunity, or simply a pragmatic pivot? I wanted to ask, to peel back the layers of his decision, but the moment felt too fragile. As if he sensed my curiosity, Everett's expression shifted, his voice dropping to a more introspective register. "Singapore wasn't part of the plan," he admitted, "but it feels right. A fresh start, new challenges. Sometimes losing everything strips away the noise and shows you what really matters." His words hung in the air, weighted with a raw honesty that caught me off balance. Was he speaking about his career, his life, or something deeper? Something tied to the history we'd once shared? My mind flashed to the day I'd found that cruel note taped to our door, the moment that had shattered my world and set me on this path. Before I could respond, Maya approached, her presence a gentle interruption. "Thalia, another stakeholder is waiting to speak with you," she said, her tone professional but warm. I turned back to Everett, extending my hand. "Safe travels," I said, the gesture feeling like a quiet closing of a chapter. "Marshall knows how to reach you if we have questions about the integration." He took my hand, his grip brief but firm, his expression unreadable yet thoughtful. "You've built something extraordinary here, Thalia," he said, his voice carrying an unexpected sincerity. "Not just taking over these properties, but reimagining them. It's what they always deserved." The words hit me like a wave, stirring a complex mix of pride, surprise, and a faint ache for what might have been. Before I could respond, he gave a single nod, turned, and wove through the crowd, pausing briefly to exchange words with Marshall before disappearing from the event entirely. I watched him go, my heart caught in a strange dance of emotions. There was a poetic symmetry in this moment. Everett walking away from the Obsidian, just as I had once walked away from the home we'd shared. Both of us had been forced to confront who we were and who we could become, shedding old assumptions like a snake sheds its skin. The event wound down successfully, the media's focus fixed on the ambitious vision for the properties rather than the tangled personal history between their former and current owners. By nightfall, Chaos Coastal Holdings was dominating regional business news, with analysts buzzing about the impact of my consolidated portfolio on Cascadia Bay's luxury real estate market. Later that evening, alone at the perch, I stood by the window, gazing at the Obsidian's distant lights glimmering across the bay. The building no longer felt like Everett's monument. It was transforming into something else entirely, a canvas for my own vision, unbound by his expectations or the weight of our past. My phone chimed, pulling me from my thoughts. A message from Zora glowed on the screen. Perfect launch. You've officially moved from claiming his empire to forging your own. Congratulations. Her words crystallized the shift I'd felt all day. This wasn't just about acquisition or proving a point. It was about creation, about building something that bore my signature. I typed back, "Thank you, but this is just the beginning." Setting my phone aside, I turned to the preliminary designs for the Obsidian's next phase. These plans were mine, every line, every detail reflecting my aesthetic and functional priorities. The building would always carry echoes of Everett's original concept, just as I would always carry the scars and lessons of my past. But what was emerging was unmistakably my own, a testament to vision and purpose rather than reaction or retribution. The journey that began with that devastating note had evolved into something far greater than I could have imagined. In underestimating me, Everett had unwittingly set free a force that would not only redefine my life, but reshape the very skyline of Cascadia Bay. 18 months later, I stood on the Obsidian's completed rooftop terrace, the sun dipping below the horizon, painting the bay in hues of amber and rose. The Meridian Technologies data cable was seamlessly integrated, its landing facilities tucked into the building's lower levels, while the luxury residences above had sold out in a mere 3 months, a resounding testament to the property's value and the reputation Chaos Coastal Holdings had earned. My transformation of Everett's empire had exceeded even my own expectations. The coastal properties now embodied a unified vision of sustainability, community, and authentic luxury, eschewing the hollow opulence of their former iteration. The Promenade Hotel showcased rotating exhibits from local artists, breathing life into the space. The West Ridge Commercial Plaza offered affordable studios for creative businesses, fostering a vibrant ecosystem. Most profoundly, the Obsidian had become a beacon of innovative design, its resource-efficient systems setting a new standard for coastal development. Maya to Thalia, her voice crackled through my earpiece. The guests are arriving. I took one last moment to savor the view, the sunset casting a warm glow over the bay. This vista had once symbolized Everett's ambition, but now it stood as a monument to my own. Tonight was the grand opening of the Obsidian's rooftop restaurant, a space I'd entirely reimagined from Everett's original plans. As I turned to head downstairs, a quiet certainty settled in my chest. This was no longer about reclaiming what was lost. It was about creating what was possible. The Obsidian, like me, had been reborn, its potential limited only by the scope of my imagination and the precision of my execution. The Obsidian's restaurant, a pinnacle of fine dining, stood as an exclusive haven, open only to residents and their invited guests. My vision had birthed a unique fusion, a public-private hybrid where 30% of the tables were reserved for community members at affordable prices. This ensured that Cascadia Bay's breathtaking vistas, framed by walls of glass, weren't hoarded by the elite but shared with a diverse tapestry of people. As the elevator glided down to the lobby, my heart thrummed with a blend of pride and nervous anticipation. Maya, my steadfast coordinator, awaited me with the final details for the evening's grand event. Her calm efficiency grounded me as she relayed the guest list, a meticulously chosen mix of local officials, community leaders, financial backers, and media figures. This wasn't just a ribbon cutting, it was a showcase of the Obsidian's deeper purpose, far beyond the shimmer of luxury real estate. The governor's representative arrived early, Maya said, her voice steady but tinged with the same excitement I felt. And the CEO of Meridian Technology is due in about 20 minutes. I nodded, a smile tugging at my lips. Perfect. And the special arrangement we discussed? Maya's eyes sparkled with confirmation. All set. The package will be delivered during your speech, just as you requested. A wave of relief washed over me, laced with a thrill for what was to come. Tonight wasn't merely the unveiling of a building. It was the culmination of a dream that had carried me through years of relentless effort, strategic acquisitions, and transformative reclamation. What had started as a painful spark, rejection that once cut deep, had ignited a fire of determination. That wound had become my fuel, propelling me to create something enduring. Something that stood as a testament to possibility. The lobby buzzed with arriving guests, its energy electric. The space had been reimagined for the evening, adorned with striking installations by local artists and displays showcasing the Obsidian's cutting-edge features. I moved through the crowd with a practiced grace, though my heart raced beneath the polished exterior. I greeted investors who had once raised skeptical eyebrows at a newcomer's audacity to tackle such an ambitious project. I exchanged warm words with community leaders who had initially doubted my promises of accessibility, their faces now softened with tentative trust. Former Thornhill employees who had chosen to stay under my leadership offered quiet nods of respect, their presence a reminder of the loyalty we'd built together. Each interaction felt like a small victory, a step toward proving that my vision wasn't just viable, but vital. Thalia Indira, my chief operating officer at Cavos Coastal Holdings, appeared at my side, radiant in an emerald gown that seemed to capture the essence of her vibrant leadership. Her presence was a steady anchor in the whirlwind of the evening. The Meridian Chronicle reporter is eager to dive into the data cable integration, she said, her tone brisk but warm. I've carved out 10 minutes for you to break down the economic impact before your main remarks. I gave a quick nod, my eyes instinctively scanning the crowd. Despite my focus and old habits stirred, a faint hope of spotting a familiar face I'd long tried to forget. Thalia's voice softened, as if reading my thoughts. He confirmed he won't be here, she said gently, slipping a small envelope into my hand. Sent his regrets from Singapore, along with this. My fingers brushed the paper, my name scrawled in Everett's unmistakable handwriting. I tucked it into my clutch. Unopened, a quiet resolve settling over me. Whatever words he'd sent could wait. This night was mine, a milestone too significant to be shadowed by the past. The event unfolded with seamless elegance. Guests gasped at the restaurant's panoramic views, where Cascadia Bay's coastline sparkled under the night sky. The architectural details I'd designed, angles and curves that framed specific vistas, drew murmurs of awe. The menu, a celebration of local ingredients elevated through innovative techniques, echoed my philosophy for the Obsidian itself, transformation through creativity and care. As coffee was served, I stepped to the podium, positioned to let every guest see both me and the glittering bay beyond. The room hushed, a sea of expectant faces turning toward me. My pulse quickened, but my voice was steady as I began. Welcome to the crowning achievement of the Obsidian, I said, my gaze sweeping the crowd. This isn't just a building. It's a vision for what Cascadia Bay can be, a place where luxury and accessibility intertwine, where innovation serves inclusion, and where the most stunning views belong to everyone, not just a privileged few. I traced the journey from dream to reality, my words weaving a story of collaboration. I honored the construction teams who'd poured their skill into every beam, the designers who'd brought elegance to every detail, the financial partners who'd taken a chance on me, and the community advocates who'd held me accountable to my promises. The Obsidian, I explained, had evolved from one man's fleeting statement into a true community asset, a beacon of shared possibility. Then I paused, my voice dipping into a quieter, more personal register. 3 years ago, I received a message that cut deeper than I care to admit. It told me I'd never survive on my own, that I was worthless without someone else's support. The room grew still, the weight of my words settling over the crowd. Tonight I stand here not just having survived, but having thrived. Not by tearing others down, but by building something greater. Not by chasing revenge, but by chasing a vision. I gestured toward the radiant coastline beyond the glass. Our worth isn't measured by what others think of us. It's in what we create when we finally believe in ourselves. The Obsidian isn't my answer to dismissal. It's my declaration of what's possible. The room erupted in warm applause, a sound that wrapped around me like an embrace. Maya approached, carrying a sleek wooden box, the special delivery I'd planned. My fingers trembled slightly as I opened it, revealing a small brass plaque engraved with simple, powerful words. Holding it up, I read aloud, "The Cavos Lighthouse Scholarship Fund, established in connection with the Obsidian, will provide annual educational grants to women pursuing studies in architecture, urban development, and sustainable design. May they build futures limited only by their imagination, never by others' expectations." I smiled, my heart swelling as I continued. Tonight, I'm thrilled to announce this fund with an initial endowment of $5 million. The first scholarships will be awarded this fall to 10 women from our community, ensuring the Obsidian's legacy reaches far beyond these walls. The applause that followed was thunderous, especially from the community leaders who'd long championed educational access. As guests mingled afterward, many approached me, their voices thick with emotion as they praised the scholarship fund, a gesture that turned personal triumph into collective opportunity. Their words lingered, a reminder that the Obsidian was more than a building. It was a bridge to a brighter future for Cascadia Bay. Later, as the event wound down and the crowd thinned, I found a quiet corner to open Everett's envelope. Inside was a simple note card. "Scion." His words brief but heavy with sincerity. "Thalia, I've followed the Obsidian's transformation from afar. What you've created surpasses anything I could have dreamed. My greatest mistake wasn't the divorce, but failing to see the extraordinary partner I had. The Obsidian stands as proof of your vision. My life is a cautionary tale of underestimation. Congratulations on building not just a landmark, but a legacy. Everett." I read it twice, a bittersweet ache stirring in my chest. His words were genuine, seeking neither forgiveness nor rekindling, only offering recognition of what I'd achieved. I folded the note carefully, slipping it back into my clutch. The Obsidian glowed softly around me, its lights reflecting off the bay. This was my moment, my creation, my proof that from rejection could rise something extraordinary. A legacy not just for me, but for all who dared to dream beyond the limits others set. From the terrace of the deserted restaurant, I stood alone, the cool night air brushing against my skin as I gazed out at the twinkling lights of Cascadia Bay. The city sprawled before me, a shimmering tapestry of ambition and dreams, but my eyes were irresistibly drawn to the distant silhouette of the lighthouse. That solitary beacon, standing resolute against the dark, had once been my sanctuary, a place of quiet refuge where I could gather my thoughts and summon the courage to begin anew. It was also my launching point, the humble origin of a journey that had carried me to this moment of breathtaking triumph. The path between that modest starting point and this extraordinary pinnacle was not paved with gold or glory, but with the raw, unyielding work of self-discovery, a treasure far more precious than any empire of brick and mortar. In my hand, I held the note, its edges worn from countless moments of reflection. It wasn't an apology, nor was it a plea for forgiveness. It was something far more profound, an acknowledgement, raw and unadorned, perhaps the most honest exchange Everett and I had ever shared. As I traced my fingers over the envelope, I felt a swell of emotions, pride, clarity, and a quiet, resolute strength. Everett had been wrong about me, spectacularly so. His dismissal, his underestimation, had once cut me to the core, leaving me to question my worth in the shadow of his towering arrogance. But in that wound, I found a gift I might never have uncovered otherwise. His doubt had been the spark that ignited my resolve, forcing me to confront the truth I had buried deep within, that the most potent force in my life wasn't the approval of a partner, but my own fierce, unshakable belief in possibilities that others were too blind to see. I slipped the note back into its envelope, tucking it carefully into my pocket. It wasn't a relic of loss or a monument to pain. No, it was a talisman of what I had gained. Not a husband, not his fleeting validation, but something infinitely more enduring. Myself. The true victory didn't lie in the sprawling portfolio of properties I had wrested from his grasp, though that was no small feat. Each building, each deed, each glittering asset now under my name was a testament to my tenacity. But they were not the heart of my triumph. The real revenge was in the discovery that I had always been the architect of my own value, crafting a legacy not from his rejection, but from my own relentless determination to rise above it. As I turned to leave, my reflection caught my eye in the restaurant's glass doors. The woman staring back at me was not the one who had once crumbled under the weight of dismissal. She was confident, her posture radiating a quiet authority earned through years of proving herself, not to others, but to the voice within that had always whispered she was capable of more. She was accomplished, her achievements etched not just in the skyline of Cascadia Bay, but in the very fabric of her being. And she was complete, whole in a way that no external validation could ever grant. The woman who had once been deemed worthless now held the keys to every property in Everett's former empire. But more importantly, she possessed something far greater: the unshakable knowledge of her own capacity to turn pain into power, rejection into resilience, and dreams into reality. This was the true legacy of the Obsidian, not the cold gleam of glass and steel, but the alchemy of the human spirit. It was the transformation of hurt into healing, of doubt into determination, of a future once constrained by others' limited vision into one boundless, shaped only by the scope of my own imagination. As I stepped away from the terrace, the city lights seemed to pulse with the rhythm of my heartbeat, each one a reminder that I was no longer defined by what I had lost, but by what I had built. And in that moment I knew the greatest triumph wasn't in outwitting Everett or claiming his empire. It was in becoming the woman who could stand here, whole and unafraid, ready to write the next chapter of a story that was entirely her own.